Okay, it's 5 o'clock, and I'd like to call the work session to order. We will be having the regular session starting at 6:30, and we'll go over all of our normal stuff then. But the first item on the agenda is receive presentation and discussion findings of development code assessment analysis with Matt Lewis, Simple City Design. Mr. Lewis?
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Matt Lewis with Simple City Design. And tonight we're going to take you on a continuation of your journey of building Bastrop. Last week we introduced the council and the community to the DNA of the downtown, the authenticity which makes up downtown. This report is an analysis of your existing development codes, of what you've got on the books now, what you're requiring for your developments. I thought this was a wonderful quote to introduce the concept of what we're doing here. We're, as a community and as us being part of the team with building Bastrop, we are planning the future development patterns for Bastrop, Texas for the next 186 plus years, and how might these decisions inform the future of the city, and so that we can ensure that Bastrop builds in a responsible manner. We feel that this slide is extremely important to introduce the council or further explain to the council and the community the scale of your city jurisdiction, which is the darker portion of gray here, versus your extraterritorial jurisdiction, or commonly referred to as ETJ. Your statutory ETJ is a smaller area, but your voluntary ETJ is quite large. And how might these decisions that you're making with your development regulations inform those patterns of development going forward, since you all do have subdivision authority within that area as well as environmental regulations within those areas under the state law. Zoning started out with a pretty rough history in the United States. Historically, it had been used to exclude types of businesses and people. For example, the first use of zoning in its earliest form was in 1885 in San Francisco, where there was a large group of Chinese migrants coming to town, and the city outlawed Chinese laundromats to ensure that the population couldn't infiltrate certain districts in town. Zoning became more prevalent in the 1920s and 1926. New York started adopting zoning to help with tenement buildings, so that there was air, light, and adequate resources so that tenants within these big dense structures actually had access to air, light, and natural resources. So then it started becoming a more positive thing. Modern zoning codes they're very auto-dominant, and we are designing around a technology that became prevalent in the 1940s, and it was the fastest way for us to move. And cities started to morph their populations and their geographies, their zoning regulations and development codes to emulate these patterns. We had an abundance of land. Land was cheap. Cars were becoming affordable, and we could move out from the city center into fringe areas, and it was the high quality of life. Everyone got their own little cabin in the woods, if you will. And that was the way that zoning codes started to get created, and that's the way that those were designed. I do want to inform you all, the findings of this report are they're not very specific to Bastrop. They're very general in most zoning codes that we see and read. And so in this sense, Bastrop is not very unique. These are very similar findings we'll find throughout the region. Design is typically an afterthought. When the developers are studying these lots, they look at the maximum lot yield, and when you're doing commercial or infill development, the first analysis that you run is the parking regulations. How much parking is it going to create, and that will drive the design. You back the building into the space after you've designed your parking lot. It's the way that the zoning codes have been used, and it's creating placelessness in places that are very auto-centric. The requirement for separation of uses. So you would have a separation requirement or buffers, either via fencing or landscaping, to buffer commercial uses versus residential uses. Different residential density types get buffered and have wall requirements, fencing requirements to ensure that they're screened. And that's the general characteristics which make up modern zoning codes. Limited housing choice. And generally what you see is there's one or two different housing types that can actually be fiscally built under the development codes. Even though you may have 15 housing development options, generally they're leading to one or two types of characteristics. The infrastructure requirements that go along with these patterns of development are extremely expensive. The scale of infrastructure has grown quite a bit, and oftentimes they're plagued with arbitrary regulations that are just adopted from a city down the street. Parking requirements, how many parking spaces per square foot for a bank, for a retail. They're pretty arbitrary, and there's not a lot of logic or reason that goes into them. And oftentimes you see development outcomes that look like this. And we think about all of the time spent at the council meetings, the staff review, the engineers, the planners, the designers creating these places, and yet the outputs like this and the fiscal viability of these products are very difficult to adapt and to retrofit. And the other thing is the scale of it creates the allowance for movement of one type of way, and it's by automobile because the scale is too large for people to walk, dangerous to bike or those types of things. And when you get down at the street level, oftentimes it looks like this. We call these inactive street edges, walled off. And so we invite you all to analyze these as we go forward. And the development outcomes ultimately come in to look like this. This is at the corner of 969 and 183. You can imagine the traffic counts there are extremely high, and generally when you see commercial strip centers like this, what they say that they need to be successful is high traffic volume, right? And so here's an example of high traffic volume that the output still failed, and this is what's on the ground today. I said this. Development codes are more than technical standards. They determine the future of our cities. This exercise that we're going through is not something that should be shelved. This is something that is adaptable, it's flexible, and it should be morphed as trends change, as technology shift, as human habits change, and the development codes that regulate your city are requiring the outputs and the outcomes that you're receiving of your city. Zoning of the future. Our anticipation and hope is that the next generation of zoning codes will be used to repair the built form of our cities, reconnecting people back to places, reinvesting in infrastructure, which the cities have already spent money on, and actually utilize the infrastructure to the appropriate and maximum capacity to ensure that you're actually receiving the results of the infrastructure that it can support. We believe that those are the types of things that should be going forward. And using place-type zoning is a very good tool to create that. It's very similar to your character areas that you have defined in your comprehensive master plan, and I'll get into that in just a bit here. In place-type zoning, the buildings and street types align to create adaptable, flexible places so that as trends shift, as market trends shift, business technology shifts happen, the buildings can be adaptable in a flexible way. What happens to the American Main Street in the age of Amazon? Right? People's purchasing habits change. Well, we're at a peak out with technology, and so how might we have flexible places that will adapt during those types of business transactions? Encourage creative businesses and uses of space so that you allow for retrofitting of space is extremely important. Places are comfortable and provide options to live, options to walk, shop houses, live and work units, the allowance for cost-effective incremental changes to happen where you allow for incremental patterns to shift or morph the patterns that you already created. How might you allow for developers to come in and incrementally change some patterns but not trigger full compliance that's so cost prohibitive that they can't adapt their own business, right? And so those types of things are really important to analyze as you go through this process. Connect residents to services through infill development. We believe that there's quite a bit of infill availability within Bastrop, and how might that get designed and created, and then create places worth caring about, which is the authentic Bastrop that you all know. The zoning code and the comprehensive master plan are they are integrated very at the core of the comprehensive master plan. The bold goals of the 2036 comp plan require strategic policies and intentional focus from removing these historical zoning and development obstacles that you have. And this chart shows your growth areas, and it had a sliding scale of community growth. And we thought that was a really good exercise that went through. And as we're going through the exercise of creating the development codes, we should be evaluating and making sure that the comp plan is directly correlated with these inputs and outputs. There are 9 plan elements in your comprehensive master plan, all which feed into the overall code and land development code regulations that you're creating. How many park land acres do you want per citizen? You know, those types of conversations need to be integrated into this exercise so that the outputs will lead to long-term success for the community. Cultural arts and tourism, planning in the context and vision, the annexation and growth and infrastructure. Those are extremely important to have an understanding of sequential order so that when you're building your infrastructure patterns and you're allowing for growth to take place, how is it orderly and how is it maximizing your infrastructure systems so that you're not overwhelming them outside of their abilities. Public facilities, as how do you serve these individual components as the growth happens. Housing and neighborhoods speaks for itself. Land use and urban design characteristics, transportation, parks, recreation, cultural tourism. All of these elements are extremely important and need to be informing the decisions of your land development codes as we proceed through these efforts. So now we're going to get into the actual code assessment and the specific findings of the Bastrop code. Again, as I stated in the introduction, these are not unique to Bastrop, and I hope that they're not offensive, but they're factual. Your codes are extremely generic and ineffective in the way that they're creating the outputs and the way that they're being used. The codes conflict with the master plan, and I'll get into each of these elements in more depth here. The codes create places for cars and not people. They created a lack of housing choice. They're extremely difficult to use and administer, particularly for the city staff trying to administer these codes. Well, I'll get into it in a second, sorry. This is kind of exciting and also, it's extremely important. It has poor design standards, and then the complex sign code is not context sensitive. And so generic and ineffective zoning districts. You have very one-size-fits-all standards for a variety of place types, a variety of soil types, a variety of conditions, a variety of grades. And so that's a difficult thing to utilize. Traditional neighborhood development is not allowed outside of your downtown form-based code area. It's the area of town that you all know and love, and it has been timeless and has worked, and it is flexible and it's adaptable, and yet it's been outlawed in your ordinances. The zoning districts create anywhere America. The general standard, 7,000 square foot lots. The street standards, the dimensional design elements of the code require the same as Pflugerville, Bastrop, Round Rock. I'm sorry, not Bastrop. Actually, yes. Bastrop, Round Rock, Hutto. They're really similar characteristics. They're same type of development codes, and you're receiving the very similar outputs. And so we're just informing you of the regulations that are in place and the outputs that they create. That's the overall intent of this. Innovation is not really allowed. The generic boxed-in standards don't allow for much interpretation for developers or building owners or businesses to get creative because you've boxed them in with these generic standards that don't allow for flexibility. And then the single-use districts create subdivisions and strip centers rather than neighborhoods with retail, neighborhoods with services. They're very isolating. They've got large buffer requirements, both spatially and physically, which create physical and spatial divides, which discourage people from walking, discourage people from interacting, and it actually creates isolated little pockets. The codes conflict with the comp plan, which is bullet number 2. The comp plan calls for a diverse of housing mix, neighborhood-centric places. The code designs disconnected places through those generic standards. The comp plan vision calls for preservation of history and character while embracing progress. That was one of the main statements of the comprehensive master plan. The code is not aligned with this statement and does not allow for the creation of places to represent the city's history. Again, as already stated, other than the form-based code area, which you all have coded back in for infill development within that geographic boundary only. The plan calls for a series of transportation options. The code does not create places that support transportation options due to the large-scale infrastructure requirements, the location and requirements of parking, the scale of parking, the parking calculations, and requires the separation of uses. So the physical place that you're building is limiting those options. And here's some, Places for cars. The parking is dominating in driving design. High parking requirements for small infill development either make them non-viable, so they don't either come to fruition, or people have to get extremely creative in retrofitting places to accommodate the parking requirements. Separation of uses ensure people drive from use to use. And the buffer requirements guarantee uses are disconnected and walled off, and use street walls as your terminology, which in the previous presentation I should have had an example here as well. Long blank walls are dividing factors of the community. Minimum lot standards create long distances between residential uses and other uses. You have pretty large minimum lot requirements. And we see this often in cities because generally bigger is better, and the larger lot, then the correlation was the larger the lot, the higher quality home you would receive on that lot. I don't know if that was the history behind the lot standards here, but that was generally the frame of mind when these original zoning codes came to be. And so speaking of history, Bastrop has a very fragmented history. We dug as deep as we possibly could to try and unravel some of the original history. We found the original plat in verbiage, but not the map. I guess it had deteriorated, and there's not the original plat of Bastrop no longer exists in a physical form. We would love to go back and create that, but there is a lot of history here, and so we were not able to unravel all of the history which created these, but generally speaking, it looks like this was adopted from a series of other communities. This image here is a little bit difficult to see, but it's a duplex, side-by-side, designed by Sinclair Black and Black and Vernoy. This type of housing product would be illegal under all of your zoning standards. Can't build it based on your setback requirements, your minimum calculations for the way that multifamily is done. And so, again, minimum lot size of 7,000 square feet. The multifamily standards allow for 2 types of garden apartments and 2 density types. Garden apartments are the apartments that you see out along the highways that are generally wrapped in parking. They have disconnected buildings, and then they will be grouped in a kind of odd configuration. But it's because that's what the code is requiring. When you start site designing these complexes under these standards, your code's creating it, and that's how you hit your minimum lot configurations based on your spatial requirements of your multifamily zoning classifications. The allowance in multifamily zoning districts cannot be fully built or designed due to the regulations, particularly triplexes, quadplexes, 8plex, 6plex, tiny homes, group homes, or grouped condos. When you start running the spatial dimensions, they say they're allowed, but you can't actually quantify it without buying a much larger tract of land to offset the numbers to make the numbers work. So it's cost prohibitive to build those types of products under your existing development code. Mobile home only allows for HUD manufactured homes and no other form. So no smaller houses or tiny houses with or without wheels. So that's under the under the mobile home classification. Those are the requirements. Like a housing choice continued, this is site and facade elevations are required at the time of zoning for each product, and we challenge that the design standards are not actually achieving anything, but it's a requirement of your zoning ordinance for them to submit facade and site elevations at the time of zoning. That's very preliminary to achieve those types of requirements, and also pretty unique in zoning codes. I would love to get more feedback from the staff and from the community about what that's about. Usable open space requirements don't necessarily generate usable open space, but you have that requirement in your code. So generally what you're getting is leftover space. It's a code requirement, and so we might want to analyze the actual implementation of that requirement, because it could be useful once you actually start talking about the characteristics which define usable open space. The spatial dimensions create large, low-density products on large parcels of land. That's because of the spatial dimensions and numerical standards of your zoning code, and buffers between single-family, commercial, and industrial create places that are not integrated over into the overall community, but receive isolated areas in which they go. And I would even argue that multifamily would fit within this as well, based on the existing zoning map and the placement of where they're located. The codes are difficult to use and administer. It's a very text document. So the code standards are difficult to locate. You're actually regulating some of your key standards of your code out of the definitions section of the code. They're not even in the actual code standard section. The regulations are housed within a definition. We had to work through staff. We had an interpretation issue that we couldn't locate when we were studying the codes, and we contacted staff, and they said, oh, that's in the definition section. I was like, well, there's no way we would have ever been able to understand why these regulations were coming to be, because no one's going and reading the definition section when you're designing products. So we discovered that through a conversation with the staff and by asking a few questions. The terminology and multiple definitions create conflicts which make the code hard to interpret unless you're a user of it every day. But even then, for staff, they may have conflicts in the code that they're trying to have to administer and interpret, which puts them in an awkward situation, but you also want them to be able to make the call. So that's something that definitely needs to be cleaned up. The document is primarily text-based with a few tables. There are a few tables that try to articulate points, particularly in the sign code, and oftentimes those are more complicated than the actual text that's associated with it. So we actually have an example of this in just a second. And then parking requirements are long and complicated and don't align with the use tables. That's extremely difficult when you're trying to design a project here. The layers of requirements don't often match. Shared parking section is extremely complicated and difficult to achieve, which discourages shared parking agreements to take place, which would reduce impervious cover, reduce stormwater flooding and small area flooding. And so it's extremely important to analyze those standards as going forward. And here's an example of a code with a text-based document. This is kind of what yours currently looks like versus the same standards reoriented, showing where and how the code could read in a logical manner that's graphically based. Design and construction standards, only the commercial buildings have material requirements. There's no orientation, entrance, or transparency standards or articulation of building requirements, which is extremely important when we analyze the downtown DNA. Bullet number 2 are the key elements which make that place great, which make the downtown lovable, which make it flexible, adaptable for market trends. And so the fact that there's no orientation requirements is extremely detrimental. And if the first 15 feet of how the public and private realms interact, where the private side starts and where the public side ends, that space is so critical to the definition of a quality environment. We challenge that is a key section that needs to be evaluated when going forward. And in fact, the DNA explicitly called attention to those key elements which make downtown wonderful. Row houses are outlined based on these standards. Material lists conflict from each other. The commercial buildings must be fenced or walled off from other uses. And with good design improvements, we believe that these could really be integrated into the community rather than separated of uses. The complex sign code. The sign code is overly wordy and extremely complicated. There are 54 different sign types defined in your sign code. I can't even think of 54 types. You have them defined. So you have 54 defined term sign types in your code. And several of them don't have visualizations explaining the intent, what they're about, where they came from, how they would be used. Each sign type varies by zoning district, so you have to check the zoning district and sign type to see if you're actually allowed to achieve that. And there's different standards for the sign types based off the zoning code and the sign code. So it's cumbersome. And then you've got to calculate the cumulative building size in order to calculate, and the speed of the roadway in order to calculate your signs. You have to do a long math equation in order to calculate your square footage of your sign based off of those standards, and even then, it's extremely difficult to accomplish. It's probably one of the most difficult sign codes we've ever seen in the entire region. It was extremely complicated and long, and there's no real reason behind it, and so we are excited to clean that up. Going from Euclidean zoning to place type zoning. This would require the alignment of place types, street types, and zoning districts so that those standards can create outcomes so that your built environment is reflective of the street types that are getting built on as you go forward. Clear code standards that are logical and remove arbitrary regulations. Minimum lot sizes. I would argue, why not the minimum lot size be 9 feet? That's the width of a head-in parking spot, right? And if you require one parking spot per building, you could have a 9-foot building, and maybe an entrepreneur or someone with a little bit of startup money could actually come and build a building and have ground floor retail and a residential upstairs in a small space. And how might we allow that to happen? So provide flexible standards which match various land conditions. There are so many nuances on the ground, and you can't code for all of these varieties. And so there's no way you can achieve that, otherwise your code would be 10,000 pages long. So how do we create flexible and adaptable standards to match those land patterns? Those are the types of questions we should be having as we go forward. And I'm alluding, there's a great public event coming up, and I'll get to it in just a second. The community goals should be driving the zoning and the mapping of the new code. Where and how should the development patterns be taking place? This should be a community and council conversation, and a user-friendly code for the staff and the development community and also the citizens to be able to use, articulate, and understand the intent behind the code sections. One of the place type creating zoning is missing middle housing, and so how might we start to code back in? You know, we have this covered, the single family housing, and then you have a multifamily housing, but not necessarily in this particular form. And all of these types of housing products that are coded out currently, duplex, triplex, fourplex, courtyard apartments, bungalow courts, we have a series of small single family houses fronting a central courtyard, townhomes or row houses, multiplex buildings, or live-work units, right? And so we have them in the downtown area, but they're not allowed anywhere else in town. So how might the city encourage or allow these types of products to be built back in with the new code? Development in the right place. So this is the transect. And so essentially, you know, nature is T1, and downtown Austin would be what's called T6. And how might you code all this variety of housing types in so that citizens of Bastrop that were born here could raise their family here and go through the full life cycle with a variety of housing choices and not have to leave this city? Humans are like animals. Some humans like rural environments. Some people like urban environments. And you've got a cross section in between where everyone kind of thrives, and that may shift over your lifetime depending on your life choices. And so how might Bastrop look to encourage that type of development pattern into its future? The other thing that we believe there's great opportunities with is small incremental changes to create big transformations. Under your existing development code, you're required to do right-of-way agreements and license agreements to allow for encroachments into the right-of-way for store products to come out into the sidewalks, those types of things. This was just a quick example where someone did a pop-up park in the front of their store, removed some off-street parking, but it now created an active gathering space and a little bit of relief from the density, and it's a small code change that could immediately allow those types of things to take place. Next is, what is the right fit for the Bastrop code? We believe that this is a big conversation we should have. Place types and geographically sensitive standards. The geography here is extremely unique, and it needs to be respected, and particularly with the drainage systems which get aligned with the overall development patterns. Alignment of the infill development standards with the existing patterns to ensure that the patterns of development emulate and complement the patterns on the ground currently. And so some of the thoughts would be like introduction of traditional neighborhood development, which is the blocks that are forming downtown. 330-foot blocks, 330 by 330 is your downtown, and then in the residential area it was 330 by 350. So that block pattern is being used. So you form a series of gridded networks of streets by your blocks. That's traditional neighborhood development patterns. Clustered land development is where you would preserve open space, and so you would cluster the building patterns in a tighter little pocket. You have smaller setbacks. The houses may be located closer in proximity. You may have a little corner store that's integrated into the community to provide services, but the overall network is built into a pretty much an open space area. So you have most parks and greenery around the little clusters. So clustered land development may be a great concept for Bastrop. How might we use those types of things going forward? And then a village development, dense little mixed-use centers with maybe not so much single-family housing types that get built in the appropriate manner. And how might those types of patterns be available and flexible for Bastrop? These are just conversation starters, but we believe that there's patterns out there and there's inputs which could really help start to frame these conversations. The next steps, using the information gathered from the existing code analysis, the comprehensive master plan, community input, staff input, and the downtown DNA will begin drafting new code standards. determining the appropriate areas for preservation. Where would the city like to preserve parks, food production, trail systems? Those types of items need to be identified going through this exercise. And then opportunities for transformations, adaptive reuses, or full redevelopments, and how might those take place and where should they go. Begin translation of existing zoning districts into new district standards, and begin consolidating sign types from the 54 down to a logical number, and make logical standards that would correspond with the types of signs which would be coded forward. Upcoming events, we have the 2 rodeos coming up. We're going to be wrangling the designs and the codes, and this is we are inviting public to join this conversation. It's extremely important that we have public input into this session so that we can begin designing the characteristics which make up Bastrop and how it could inform the city going forward, so that the long-term build-out emulates the patterns that the community feels are important. And the first one is November the 29th and 30th, and the Code Rodeo, which is December 13th and 14th, will begin to actually come up with the numerical standards which would emulate the patterns that are coming out of the design rodeo. Again, that's why it's so important that the community be involved in this, so that we can have that conversation about the overall designs, and then we start creating the numerical standards which code those designs, and those would be your new regulatory standards which would emulate the patterns that would be coming out of the design rodeo. So with that, I'm here to answer any questions that you all may have. Thank you.
Mayor, since he went through that fairly quickly, is it possible, or do y'all mind if he goes back and starts with the code conflict with the comp plan? Matt, what I would think would be important is for, now that you've given them an overview of what's wrong with it, why don't you talk about what it's going to take to fix it?
Okay. What it's going to take to fix it is really analyzing what the overall system looks like going forward. How do we want to use the comp plan to inform the codes? And where do you start applying development patterns on the ground, and where would they be appropriate? So it's going to be analyzing infrastructure. It's going to be looking at development characteristics, trends, having dialogues with the development community about fiscal viability and fiscal responsibility of the products going forward. This will take a full code rewrite. I mean, we're going to be rewriting every standard in your existing code. And so this is a comprehensive overhaul of all of your land development regulations and your sign standards to ensure that the patterns and the standards match. And so we would need to analyze, what does the overall street network look like? And where are key streets going to be constructed? And what are the minimum standards? And how might the street types be built to have the similar character as the development patterns? How might we use open swell in rural areas where we're not requiring curb and gutter and wide street sections? You could cut costs, reduce impervious cover, and you can start to match up these standards so that the place types speak to you as you're driving through them. If you're in a rural environment, you're aware you're in a rural environment. And if you're in an urban environment, you're aware, based on the street types and the development patterns, you're in an urban environment. And in between, if you're in a suburban environment, how does the suburban environment actually look, feel, and function under different development scenarios? So I hope that, is that kind of going where you're going?
Yes, and part of this is for the benefit of council, and so when you get through with their questions, I'd like you to go back and slow down, because you were driving this train extraordinarily fast, and really when you talk about places for cars, what does that exercise look like in the transportation options? But I know you've got some questions coming up, but I think that it's important for, now that they have a context for the conversation, to go back and really break apart what that looks like. Because the silver lining to this journey is we've got a phenomenal comp plan. So there really are some guiding elements that are going to make the number of decisions that have to be made and the complications of the decisions to be made are easier, because we have a very good guide, a vision, if you will, for the community. But for our citizens at home that aren't well versed in codes and what that looks like, they may not appreciate the decisions that have to be made, the policy that needs to be made, and once they do, I hope that helps them put these rodeos on their calendar, because it's phenomenally important that our community engage in these decisions and how we're going to move forward, and I think this is an opportunity to help connect where we are to where we need to be and what that looks like.
Councilmember Ennis?
Thank you, Mayor. First off, Matt, I read your report from one end to the other, and I was cross-eyed by the time I got through with it, but extraordinary amount of work, and I applaud all the efforts you've put into it so far. My first question is, can you define character areas for us? I think it's an important piece of the puzzle that I was interested in, and some other folks might be.
Character areas is a defined term in your comprehensive master plan, and it's used to define different geography types, different standards of development patterns, if you will. And so your character areas in your comp plan, I don't have them. I wish I would have put them in here. Go from a rural character area to your downtown character area to mixed-use character areas. And so they call out for different development densities, different patterns of development, different lifestyle types, and we also believe that it should match with the street types as well. So those are the character areas, and that's a defined term under your comp plan. So we use that as our framework for explaining these characteristics going forward.
That's where I was going. I wanted to start with that, and
Yes, sir.
mainly for some folks who may be watching from home. But also, are you going to use that as the framework for the code revision? Bottom line.
Yes, sir. So the intent would be that you would have your character areas as the overall, the overarching land use classification, and under those character areas, you would have different zoning classifications. And so you may have 3 or 4 zoning classifications that fit under each character area. And so the character area would ensure that the comprehensive master plan is aligned, your future land use map, which is under your comprehensive master plan, would be aligned with your zoning classifications. And so the zoning classifications will directly correlate back up to the hierarchical character areas.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Matt, it's my understanding that those character areas, although they're defined in the comp plan, there's not a correlation with the current zoning classes. It's pretty loosely.
Jen, is that true? If the character areas in your current zoning, are you using that at all for your land use decisions? Right. I don't know if they're using that or not. It's not necessarily aligned.
I don't think they are.
Are you using character areas or your land use to inform zoning?
Yes, we are. That's part of the analysis in all of the rezoning cases. We haven't had a lot come through since the comprehensive plan was adopted. That is the basis. If the comprehensive plan future land use doesn't match, you would have to do a plan amendment.
But we didn't go back through, once those character areas were defined, we didn't go back
No,
through
we didn't go
and
back through.
realign
No,
all
that's
of
what this
this.
exercise will be.
That was the question.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Councilmember Jones? Oh, Mr. Peterson?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Matt, as we go through the codes and start realigning the codes and so forth, would it be advantageous to incorporate or expand the form-based code area?
Yes, sir. So that's a great question. And I think that should be a community conversation, is how might that form-based code area inform other land patterns? And maybe there's some greenfield areas that could receive that same type of treatment as the form-based code area. And so maybe it's an optional code that's kind of coded as a area that could be utilized in greenfield settings. So I think that's a great recommendation, sir.
Councilmember Jones?
I just wanted to make 2 points, and one is from the perspective of citizen involvement, there's some decisions we can't make unless the citizens get involved. And I think specifically just about the uniqueness of all the different landfills that we have, you know, an example on the north side of town, on the northeast side of town. And so I think that's really important. And the other thing is that in this whole process, I didn't really hear you talk about affordable housing in the plan to incorporate affordable housing into all this. I didn't know if that was something that you would like to touch on.
Sure. Affordability is extremely important, and that's a really good point. I actually should have incorporated more of that into the presentation. The minimum lot standards you have now drive up affordability. The lack of maybe accessory dwelling units or living units in the backyard, small cottages, those types of things are not necessarily allowed other than in the downtown area. So there are several tools to help with affordability, and we would love to explore that going forward, particularly looking at shrinking some of the lot dimensions or putting the right tools in the right place or increasing various density patterns. Under the DNA report, we did one analysis which showed 34 units an acre in a downtown building, just to show that may not be the quantitative measurement that we want to evaluate when talking about density and intensities, when talking about unit sizes, those types of things. So maybe there is a different tool which could be utilized for affordability, but it will be an important section. Yes, ma'am, that's great.
But, just in response to that, I mean, personally, just the conversations that I've had with Matt and what the direction that we're going, and then incorporating into that the plan for affordable housing, and it's a genuine solution, is pretty exciting for the community.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
Yeah, ma'am, what processes are, perhaps a better question is, how difficult is the process to determine which areas will be preserved, transformed, or redeveloped? Is that I realize it's probably a comprehensive process, but can you kind of give us a synopsis of what process will be undertaken?
Yes, sir. And we've already began that process. So the first thing we've done is started studying the maps of the area, mapping out any floodplains, tributaries, creeks, any of the existing development patterns that are already on the ground. And so basically what we're going to do is backfill out and create a green print, if you will. Where are the existing green spaces that remain? Where are the floodplains and the rivers, any steep grades which may be difficult to build on, and so you can start backing out the overall development patterns and those characteristics so that you're left with the areas where preservation or greenfield development would start to occur. We're in the mapping process now, so I think it's going to be a multi-layered effort in order to accomplish that, and particularly when you start talking about different land patterns over those areas. But what we would like to do is allow those types of green prints to inform the conversation for the community, so we can start saying, well, where's their great soil? Or, hey, this was historically a farm, and maybe that gets preserved as food production. And in order to accomplish that, maybe there's like transfer development rights for that property owner that they get to sell those development rights somewhere else. There are endless opportunities to accomplish this, and we believe that right-sizing it for Bastrop is the critical step. And so we've come up with a very public process to begin the unfolding or unpacking this information so that we can inform these decisions going forward, and coming up with a system structure which would let the overall outputs be representative of Bastrop. And so that's kind of how we've begun the process at this point.
Council, any other comments or questions?
Couple of comments. The three types of zoning types by code, the traditional, the cluster, and the village. I'd like to see some examples or exemplars of that. I know the Woodlands has a series of villages that have been very successful, and so I'm aware of that. I'm not sure if everybody else is, but if you could provide at some point in time during this process examples of those zoning types, that would be outstanding from a learning perspective.
Great, yes, sir. We will do that. I'll share those.
I'd like to make the comment that we were talking about, you and I were visiting about the 34 units per acre. If you hear that, most people would be like, absolutely not, because they're thinking of a high-rise apartment. But if you say, would you be okay with a 900 square foot apartment over a retail space? Now suddenly it's like, well, golly, 900 that's bigger than my first apartment when I was in college. And so that doesn't seem like such an increased density. And from an infrastructure standpoint, we aren't maintaining any more street. We're not building another sidewalk. It's the same water service that would take care of it. And there are times in your life that you would want to live in a 900 square foot apartment where you don't have to mow the yard and you don't have to take care of a lot of things, and then there's times when you don't want to. And I think part of what we're trying to do is provide choices so people have the option. I wanted to make a comment on, Councilmember Jones brought up the affordability, and boy, that's one of those words that as soon as you say affordability, people go, if there's 10 people, they go 10 different directions on what that means. And I know that we've talked about it before with being workforce housing, but it seems to me also it's just offering different housing choices. It's different types, and it doesn't mean that everyone has to live in a patio home or a townhouse, but it means there are folks that could benefit from having that as a housing option. You made one comment, and I just want to go back because you said, and I'm not trying to get staff in trouble, but it's just something I noticed, that our current code requires site and facade elevations required at time of zoning. We don't see site and facade elevations. I think of the zoning case that we spent 2 meetings talking about, and that's not information that was presented. I completely agree with you that that's an inappropriate thing to ask for, and one of the things we talked about is once you change the zoning, it's changed, and you can have many things that would meet the zoning requirement. So I just thought that that was interesting that our code requires it, but I believe there's also times when I'm sure we can find a part of the code that says that it's not required. I think when it's difficult, we are really, the people who are paying the biggest price is the community, because staff has a really hard time giving one answer if you can find 6 depending on where you look in the code, and anybody that's trying to do a project in town is frustrated, and so the community doesn't have any assurance of what's going to be built consistently around them and in their neighborhood. Councilmember Jones?
I just wanted to go back to what you were saying about affordability, and you were talking about 900 square feet, and I just want to make it really clear that I want us to even look at apartments that are 300, 400, and 500 square feet. When you're talking about accessory units, I mean, there is a segment of the population that works really, really well for. So yeah, 900 is a palace for a lot of people, and 500 or 400 can work perfectly. Just, wanted to mention that.
I was just making the point that the reason I used 900 was because that's the size that was the 34 units per acre that he mentioned at the meeting on Thursday night. So, but absolutely, there can be all kinds of housing. And earlier this year, we were in New Brunswick, and they had cottages where they had taken, one of the ways that town had solved it was instead of having 2 7,000 square foot single family lots where you would only have 2 homes, they turned the houses to be perpendicular to the street, and they were smaller houses. They faced each other, and they had a common garden and a common sidewalk area. And so instead of having 2 houses that maybe a lot of people couldn't afford, you had, I think it was 8, and they were called cottages, and it was a small house, and you had a nice little yard around it. So there's some of it, we're not going to go dig up every single road. There's some things that we're living with, and I think we have to open our minds about what the options could be. And I really like your point of, instead of writing all the things that you can't do, if we take an approach of what things we would allow to happen, we don't even know some of the creative things that folks would come up with.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's see, the site facade. The private space, I would like you to visit about that a little bit more, about public versus private and why that first 15 feet is so important.
So where the public and the private spaces come together in the downtown area, we found that it was the most critical space. It's that first 15 feet and how the building relates to the street edge. And when you have a very clearly defined street edge and a clearly defined block length or characteristics, then it makes the place very flexible. It allows for people to slow down. They're informed at a slower pace in that type of environment. When the buildings are brought up forward, when the parking is set back, you're communicating in a much different way. You're communicating in a faster speed. You're the buildings are informing decisions, and you have billboards that are speaking to you if you're in a car, and generally you're not walking in that area. But when you build the buildings and they are directly adjacent to the street, it allows for a variety of transportation uses. It allows for more flexible business types and business patterns, and it allows for the parking to be handled in the rear, and so you won't have as many interruptions into the sidewalk. It provides for a more flexible area with regards to that. You can put street trees in. You start to put street furniture in so that people can linger, sit, and so it's much more of an inviting space when you have that first 15 feet well defined. We've captured it really well in your downtown, and so when we start talking about orientation of buildings and the placement of the different elements of development, then it becomes extremely important, those characteristics. Because when you're talking about downtown development patterns versus the current code, all of the elements of development are still present, whether you're dealing with trash and receptacles, parking, lighting standards, walkways, trees, bushes, shrubbery, right? All of the same elements of development are present, they're just rearranged. And so the design characteristics and the arrangement of those elements and how they get integrated into the physical space is the transformation that you're making. And so how might the first 15 feet be the clearly delineating space? And it's kind of like, well, it doesn't really matter what happens behind that. And you could provide for more flexibility and less regulation other than these key intersections where the public and the private realm meet, where they meet up. The seam between those two is extremely important.
Thank you, Matt.
Sure.
City Manager, did you want to speak?
We're talking a lot about the placemaking from a zoning and land use perspective, but one of the things that the comp plan talks about, and when you review the guiding principles of our comp plan, it says that all of our development must be fiscally sustainable. And so in this moment, I want to bridge that you're going to hear as a part of the work session, the creation of a fiscally sustainable model that we're going to be participating in. And the reason we're doing that are for those specific words that were put in the comp plan. So one of the things that will be one of the last litmus tests is when this plan comes together and those what are they called? Categories?
Place types.
Place types are put together. They are going to have to hold their own in the fiscal sustainability standpoint, because it would be really sad if we've taken this journey and failed to meet really the point of the comp plan, and whether you call it smart growth or managed growth, but as we move forward, we need to build a very fiscally sustainable community. And I think when we get through with our model, we're going to be able to evaluate our land use choices on something other than just how we think about them, but how they actually perform from a revenue standpoint. Because one of the things that y'all have been very clear about is ensuring that our development pays for itself as a minimum, and in some instances generates wealth for the community. And we have to be very mindful of that. So Kevin Shepard is here, and at the work session portion of our meeting this evening is going to take us on a journey about that piece, and you'll begin to this evening be able to mirror both of those up. But I didn't want to miss this opportunity to say that, yes, the land use piece and how it feels is really important, but our comp plan calls for that one last piece, and that is that fiscal sustainability. We're very fortunate that we have an engineer in the area that has offered to take our current design standards and compare them to our new standards that will be fiscally sustainable, and begin to put our development standards in alignment with our comp plan, and we'll be able to compare the two. And we believe that it could be more cost advantageous to build the journey that we're taking versus the journey that we find ourselves at. So I just in this moment wanted to punctuate that this is very important, but if there are patterns that we like but they don't pay for themselves, then that becomes a real policy question as to whether or not they stay, and if so, what percentage of the land use are you willing to allocate that to going forward?
Councilmember Jones?
And then, of course, then on top of that is just the fact that we want to create development that's safe, that drains, that's a kind of, we haven't talked about that too much. So it's pretty, all these pieces have to be woven together, and each one of them, function, safety, physical sustainability, they're all very, very important. And I think, Linda, based on our expectations as a council, you've hired experts in all those areas to work together, which is really excellent.
I agree completely. The holistic approach, because if any one of those major things, if we aren't here in 150 years, it doesn't really matter. If you're not safe when you live if you don't feel safe, if you don't want to walk around the neighborhood, then we've lost the essence of our community. So I think we're all on the same page for that. Any other questions for Matt? Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
I was surprised by the number of different sign types. Well, can you give me an idea of what a acceptable number of sign types? 54 just blows my mind.
I would say 6. You've got a band sign, you've got monument signs, you have billboards, digital message signs, you've got projection signs which project outward. 6 or 7. There's no way we need 54. We'll get really specific about coding them and the allowance for them. There are going to be policy questions about, do you want neon? Do you want channel letter signs? Are they appropriate? Where do they go? Box letter signs. There's a lot about signage, and we're hopeful that we can get a lot of public input. We'll have renderings and drawings, different sign types, and so we'll ask about the appropriateness, do some visual preference surveys. Do you like this, not this? What do you like about it? What don't you like? So we can really narrow these down to a smaller subsection.
Your guesstimate makes me feel so much better. Thank you.
Good, thanks.
I was going to ask you to list all 54, Mayor Pro Tem Nelson. Councilmember Rogers?
Yeah, I have 2 questions. What about on the signage? Then you'll have different types of areas, like zoning will have this type of signs that are allowed, and then this area will have a different types of sign?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
They should be geographically sensitive. The signage type on 71 would not be representative of what you want in your downtown, for example. The scale would be wrong, the speed would be wrong, the size inappropriate.
So it's not just 6 signs and...
It could be, they would be scaled to the appropriate areas,
Okay.
generally. Is what would
Second
happen.
question was about the parking. So the way I know, at least the way I believe the ordinance is now, you have this square, this foot, this big by this big, and that means you have to have this many parking spaces. And it really doesn't always fit the businesses I've known as they're building. Mm-hmm. So you're hoping with the new ordinances, it'll be a little bit more flexible on how many they need. Just because you have a square doesn't mean you need 50 spaces. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am. And also, maybe it's not heavily as use-based, because uses change, right? We're building our built environment for the long term, and if we're regulating parking and design standards based off of the use that's coming forward, that use may only last 3 months, and now your built environment and your infrastructure that you've got on the ground, the impervious surface that you got on the ground, is accommodating something that's completely out of compliance with what's going in. So there's a lot of reasoning behind why you would want to shift those. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
As everything, parking becomes a balancing act as well, because, there's kids, and we'll just call them what they are, those millennials that are not dying to get their driver's license, are not hoping to have a car and car insurance that goes along with it, but there's a lot of people, you're in Texas, and there's a lot of folks that want to stay in their car. So we've got to balance things, because if we suddenly have no parking requirements, then our neighborhoods are, people are going to park somewhere. So I think it's a matter of providing options, because I think you can look around town, and we get complaints every once in a while about there's no parking on Main Street, but the type of development that you were talking about where the buildings are fronted on the right-of-way line and there's parking behind it, clearly the northeast side, southeast side of Main Street is a perfect example of that. That parking lot behind, people park there and some of them go to the courthouse, some of them go to Main Street, some of them are eating, some of them are shopping, and it's full at different times of the day with different people using it, but it's all the same parking area. So there's absolutely smart ways to do that so we're not just paving Bastrop over with parking spots.
That's a great use of shared parking, which you already have in place, but your current standards make that extremely difficult for a private developer to do that.
And that's something we talk a lot about when we go to some of these conferences and stuff about the P3, and some of the private-public agreements can help solve some of those problems by, our own parking lot when it's not during normal business hours, then why wouldn't you let another business utilize the parking space if you knew, if you had control over that and you had some type of an agreement? So there's some things we can do together. Is that possible as well?
Ma'am. Yeah, absolutely.
And we mustn't forget the ADA availability and accessibility from those very same spots. I'm sure that comes into some of your formulated processes.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
All right, council, any other questions? It is 6 o'clock. We are posted to start our regular session at 6:30, so I'm going to call us into recess, and we're going to start at 6:30 so we don't surprise some folks who are coming at 6:30, and it'll let us take a quick break. So we are in recess. It is 6 o'clock. Thank you. As authorized by Section 551.071 of the Texas Government Code, this meeting may be convened into closed executive session for the purposes of seeking confidential legal advice from the city attorney on any item on the agenda at any time during the meeting. The city of Bastrop reserves the right to reconvene, recess, or realign the regular session or called executive session or order of business of any item prior to adjournment. So it is officially 6:30. I'm calling the regular session to order, and we are very privileged tonight. We have two very distinguished young men that are going to be leading us in the pledges, and Colin is going to take their picture because we have no one from the advertiser, and we'll be sharing that with them. J.P. Castellano, stand up and turn around so everybody can see you. JP is in 2nd grade at Emile Elementary. His favorite subject is math, and he very politely introduced me to his sister Isabella and his dad Oscar. And we also have with us tonight Gabriel Pena. Gabe, if you'll stand, there you go, stand right next to him. He looks very nice tonight. I'm very proud of him. He is in 4th grade, so he is big man on campus at Emile. And his favorite subject is math as well. Not such a big fan of reading, but he really, really likes math, he said. So ladies and gentlemen, if you will please rise, these two young men will lead us in the pledges. You guys can turn around, put your hands over your heart. If you will remain standing, Chaplain Burke will give us our invocation tonight. We are so thrilled and proud to have so many chaplains that support our police department. And Chaplain Burke does a lot of things, not the least of which was being Man of the Year in Bastrop.
Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you that we lived in a blessed nation, a blessed state, and a blessed community where our citizens can take an active part in democracy, as demonstrated yesterday and I'm sure today with our mid-election process, where citizens take an active part. And we just thank you for the strong turnout there, and we thank you tonight for citizens taking a part in the city council meeting tonight. We thank you for each person here, or the mayor, the city manager, and every city council member, and everybody that's taking a part in the process of this tonight. We pray wisdom upon our city council here. Lord, we thank you that as they consider each decision here tonight, that you will give them wisdom, and there will be fairness and justice in the process, and peace and order throughout. We thank you for it now. In Jesus' name, amen.
You may be seated, and you guys can go it's a school night. You are free to go if you wish. Thank you very, very much. Okay, we're going to get started on my mayor's report. I have a couple things before we get going, and Chaplain Burke brought up that early voting has started, and I voted yesterday, and the numbers I heard, they were at around 500 by about 1 p.m., so if you haven't voted, please make sure that you vote. One of the other things that's been going on lately, some of you saw the news covered part of this, just want to reassure everyone and go over again. There is not a boil water notice in the city of Bastrop. We are not the city of Austin. I heard it put the city manager into a bit of a shock, but apparently Starbucks is closed in the city of Austin because of the water situation. But in Bastrop, we are not treating river water. That's why Austin is having so much trouble, but our source is all well water. We do have some gooey wells, and that's what you call them in the business. They are groundwater under the influence of surface water. So I can't say that we're never, ever, ever going to have a problem, but those wells are sealed and submerged, and there's 30 feet of sand that allows the filtration to take place when any of that river water, once it goes over our wells. So we're in very good shape. We do not now have a boil water notice. We are not planning on having one anytime soon, but given the situation, we're doing extra testing, and every citizen can rest assured if there's any slight bit of problem, we will let you know. So if you are not already following us on our City of Bastrop, Texas City Hall, if you're not following us on Facebook or Twitter, you can always check our website. We will get the information out to everyone, but we do not anticipate there being any problem. So just want to take that one off the radar screen. And then council, if we have a round of applause, Councilmember Jones has a birthday coming up November 3rd. So. It's a big one, and thank y'all so much. I work out, I have a trainer, and he absolutely told me the other day that I had the best fast walk he's ever seen. I have great form, so thank you for that. Her birthday will be before we meet again, so we wanted to make sure and recognize that. Thank you very, very much. Okay, if we'll go to the next slide. We had a presentation, some of you weren't here at 5 o'clock, where we learned some more about our codes and actually the status of our codes, which is a bit of a mess, but we're working through all of that. There is going to be a community tour, and it is on Saturday, and you will see that you can have breakfast tacos at 10 o'clock. If you would like to bring your bike and go on a biking tour, that will start at 9 o'clock. And if you don't want to do biking, but you'd like to do a walking tour, the walking tour starts at 10:30. Both of the tour groups will meet in the middle at 10 o'clock and have some breakfast tacos and coffee. If you don't recognize the street address, it is the city manager's house, and we are very appreciative of her for hosting that.
And that's 801 Austin at the corner of Austin and Water Street.
When you see 1 million plants, house plants in pots that look gorgeous, you know you are at the right place. She has quite the green thumb and has very pretty plants. So please join us. It's the classic, if you will take time to walk and have someone pointing things out to you, it will look different than it's ever looked to you before. So if you want to go for a bike ride or you want to go for a walk, the forecast is it's going to be a really nice day. It'd be a great thing, so please participate in that. The next slide will show some pictures of some things we've all done together. I would draw your attention to the middle. That is the entire council at the TML conference. It is my understanding that is the first time in 187 years we've had the entire council at a TML conference. We all learned a lot of things. We divvied up and made sure we covered as many sessions as we possibly could, and I just really want to personally thank council for taking time to go. It was a great learning experience. Our city attorney was there, his firm had a booth, and he spoke. I was a moderator of a session. The city manager was on a panel. I think everybody really got a lot out of those few days that we were together. The Guru MD was a ribbon cutting that I went to. I was really honored to be at the Chamber Luncheon last month for the first responders. That was the first Wednesday in October, and that's Representative Syrier. We had to make sure they didn't put the keys in the helicopter because Representative Syrier would fly that helicopter away, but they did let him sit in it, and Bernie Jackson was one of the people that spoke at the meeting. But our first responders do such a wonderful service for our community, and it was really nice to recognize them. We also had National Night Out, and real pleased with the amount of, we had 8 parties and had a real nice turnout from council of participating in that. The volunteer and shop, I hear that there were some pictures online, but I did some volunteering for the Bastrop County Historical Society. They're getting ready for their big garage sale that will be on Saturday, November 3rd. So please make a point of going by there. Farm Street Opry this month. Terry Lynn Moore was one of the artists that sang, and we all enjoyed her singing. The bottom right-hand corner, Lee Dildy Boulevard, was a ribbon cutting in Elgin that I was invited to participate in. It's one of the only tours in Bastrop County, and we like to support our sister cities, and it was, that's a picture of Commissioner Beckett, myself, and Lee Dildy's daughter, and Mayor Cannon, and their city manager as well. And then, of course, we've got Kay and Maureen from the First Friday Art Walk. She made very special desserts for First Friday Art Walk, and you missed out if you weren't there. And the Home Depot, the annual safety event, that was great, and I appreciate the Bastrop Police Department had a booth, and we had all the fire engines and everybody were out. It was a great time, and it was a really good Saturday to do that. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the things that I did from October 13th to the 23rd. Here we are tonight at council. Yesterday was the first day of early voting, and I voted and strongly encourage everyone else to vote. If you go to the next slide, I want to draw your attention to the fact that the Halloween Bash is going to be at Mayfest Park. We want to thank the YMCA for organizing that. That'll be from 5 to 8 p.m. at Mayfest Park on Halloween. On November 2nd, I had noted the First Friday Art Walk, but there's also going to be an Arbor Day celebration at Bob Bryant that will start at 10 a.m. So we encourage everyone to come out and participate at that on November 2nd. Then, as I mentioned, the garage sale is on November 3rd for our Historical Society. The 7th will be the Chamber Luncheon. And on November 8th, we will be having our 2nd annual Boards, Commission, and Volunteer Appreciation Banquet. And we had such a great time last year, and we're really looking forward. I'm certain that council has made it a priority to be there. And then it'll be time for Veterans Day, and we will have our car show and recognize our veterans. We want to thank the Bastrop Area Cruisers for all they do to put together that car show. I was on a phone call with them yesterday, and I think he told me he was already at 125 cars that were registered for that car show. And then on November 13th, we will have a council meeting. And then one last slide Once again, our city attorney has received an award, and we would like to congratulate Alan as he was the Local Government Fellow recognized by the International Municipal Lawyers Association. We are pleased to have Alan on the team, and it's nice to have him recognized by so many groups. So thank you so much, Alan. Councilmember Jones.
Okay, so I just really want to point out what an honor it is to be part of this group up here. I think that Linda said it best when she said she has the best council in the state of Texas, because everybody up here is working for the best interest of the citizens, and it was a pleasure to go to that meeting. And as evidenced by our attorney, it is a big deal to be from Bastrop. We were just everywhere we went. People wanted Bastrop to be part of what they were presenting or what they were offering. Our city manager presented, our mayor was honored, our attorney. I mean, it was a really eye-opening experience to be part of a state group and have everywhere we went. When you told people that when we told people we were from Bastrop, oh my gosh, they just had so many good things to say about what we're doing, what our manager's done, the representation that our mayor gives us is just outstanding. So, yeah, just wanted to. Oh, and I'm sorry, I'm going to point out something else. Totally different subject. And I want to, if this isn't the appropriate time for me to bring this up, then maybe we can put it on the agenda for another time. But I've been getting requests from citizens about questions that have come up with addressing in the alleys. And a lot of the businesses downtown have doors that face the alley and need an address. And I thought this might be a really good opportunity, and maybe the manager can instruct me, to start naming these alleys. And so that, I've been in Bastrop almost 40 years. I don't know which one's Alley A or Alley B. I just don't know. I cannot keep them straight. I don't know. Do you know, Bill? You know which ones? I don't. But I thought it would be a really good opportunity to maybe look at putting out some names for those locations. And in my thought, I wanted to really honor some of the people that have had businesses downtown for decades. For example, I was thinking about Cervantes for the lot over there, that parking lot over there that the city's built behind Jones Square. I was thinking about Hoover for that property over there where there's just both sides of the alley that the Hoovers have developed and done a really amazing job. I was thinking about Locke Alley for over there where David Locke, a former mayor of ours, had Locke Drugstore, which was just, I was devastated when he left downtown. He was such a pleasure to go in and do business with. And then maybe even something like Long Alley over there in honor of Cecil Long. These are just people that have made huge contributions. If you're new to Bastrop, you might not know who some of these people are, but they've made huge contributions to the development of the city. But I just want to get that conversation started about looking at identifying those areas, especially as we start developing downtown so that everybody knows where we're talking about.
Duly noted, and I will have it on a future agenda, ma'am.
Thank you, Councilmember Jones. Councilmember Ennis?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to second Councilwoman Jones' comments about the Texas Municipal League conference. It was probably one of the most worthwhile educational adventures that I've had, and learned a lot. I would like to call attention to the fact that our very own mayor now sits on the board of directors of the Texas Municipal League. We should be honored that she has been afforded that position, and she also sits on the resolutions committee. So as Councilwoman Jones said, she is representing us well. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Ennis. Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
Well, I'll echo the remarks on the TML conference. It was outstanding, and I voted yesterday, so thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Councilmember Rogers?
Well, since it's a ditto and echo on the conference, and I do believe you won the walking steps during the conference and beat the mayor. I just wanted to give him that. You don't understand. They were both going, okay, I've got this many steps. No, I've got that many steps. The two of them was exciting. Just
It's not like I'm competitive or anything, but Mayor Pro Tem Nelson did get more steps in the day that I was in a long resolution.
Of course, now she did run a circle around you once. I did
Yes,
remember that.
I
So,
did.
but it was a great conference, and we learned a lot. And I just wanted to throw that in.
Thank you, Councilmember Rogers. Councilmember Peterson?
Yes, thanks, Mayor. I think everyone's have said all that can be said about TML. So it was a great conference, and we made as many individual conferences as we could. Matter of fact, my knee is still kind of out of socket here. But with that, Mayor, I'm already pre-registered for the car show. Is your car ready to go?
It's a very sad topic, Mr. Peterson.
I'm sorry.
It still has transmission issues. No, I'm not going to push the 57 Chevy. On the TML conference, there's an exhibit, there's work sessions, and we brought back all kinds of ideas and have shared those things. And you get a lot of information. You have to cull through it and do the ones that you can really apply. I think it's one of those things where our city manager's glad that we've all gone, and then there's a part of her that cringes because we've all six come back with all these great ideas, and she already had a full plate before we left. But we always want to be able to make sure that we're doing best practices, and certainly learning from the mistakes that other people have made is one of the very best things that we're able to do when we learn and go to those presentations. City Manager.
Yes, ma'am, I have two things. The first one is I'm going to ask David Brassage to come to the podium. I am very pleased to announce that David is our new building official. He started on October 15th, yes. David has been building official in Westlake Hills for 4 years. He was building official in Cottonwood Shores for 4 years. He started as a not started as a building inspector, but he was a building inspector in Austin for several years, as well as a combination inspector in Marble Falls. He has been a self-employed plumber, not only in the U.S., but overseas for 16 years. So essentially, he is the best kind of building official. Not only does he understand the codes, he is a registered plumber, and he has a wealth of experience in the construction business. So add common sense to that, and then we think we've got a home run. And in just a minute, I'm going to talk about our emergency management planning, and we've already benefited hugely from David being here. So thank you and welcome aboard. Delighted to have you.
Thank you very much.
Welcome aboard, David.
I'm very excited to be here.
Go ahead. Do you want to say anything?
Yes, I'm very excited to be here, and hope I can make a difference here. That's the main reason why I want to come to Bastrop.
I've been working with him over the last few days, and you're a joy to work with, and your knowledge has already been beneficial to the city. So welcome aboard. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
And if you go to the next slide, I know without a doubt that our current situation with the Colorado River is on the minds of most everybody in our community. And so we're operating under the principle that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If you'd go to the next slide. We've been monitoring upstream conditions since Tuesday, October 16th. We as a team, and prior to the team, our Chief Altgelt was participating in daily calls with the State Operations Center. That's when we hear what's going on all over the state. And while that may not sound like an important call, if we were to have an event, it's important to know what else is going on in the state that could potentially hamper our ability to get resources, which is important as we move into the planning aspects of emergency management. We have secured all of our critical infrastructure along the river, including our water and wastewater systems. Both Police, Fire, and Public Works have established a 24-hour schedule with employees prepared to come in and staff if needed, and we're operating that on an on-call basis until or if we need them, and we're hoping that we really don't. Our next slide, Ann. We've been communicating on a consistent basis via our website, social media channels, as well as the mayor has done a number of media interviews over the past several days to ensure quality information was being produced and shared with the region. Our city shelter is prepared to open with 1 to 2 hour notice. Last week, we established contingency plans for food, not only for our shelter, but for our first responders, should that be required, as well as additional shelters, because early last week, and I'll share with you, we didn't know what kind of opportunity we were going to have, and they were scary for sure. We've maintained daily contact with Smithville. Elgin, who's not at risk from the Colorado River, is such a good partner to us. They had a meeting with all of their directors, got their resources lined out. They knew what they could bring. They were prepared to mobilize and help us or Smithville or both, depending on what was required. We have had multiple contacts with our Department of Public Safety that's located here in Bastrop. ESD number 2 met with BISD several days, as well as Bastrop County. On Tuesday, there were 3 potential issues that could have caused us significant issues. And if you'll recall, last Monday and Tuesday, Llano and, is it Kingsland? Kingsland experienced 2 significant rain events that caused flooding that this region has not seen since 1991. And if there had been some continuous rain coming into that watershed, we could have experienced a flood with no rain that causes its own challenge, because as a community, we've experienced flooding, but it's always been raining. And so it requires some significant planning to get people to leave when there's nothing going on that causes them to leave. The second issue, and we were glad we passed that first bullet, but the second was there was going to be some additional rain that occurred Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The soil conditions upstream are completely saturated. The National Weather Service was saying anything around a half an inch or more could cause some really significant flooding. Again, numbers that we would not normally pay attention to. So we managed to make it through the weekend, and we dodged that second bullet. Our third potential bullet is Hurricane Willa that's coming ashore from the Pacific, and if their rain projections are right, life is good, but we also recognize that meteorologists are wrong 70% of the time and still employed, so we are preparing in the event this is something they get wrong, but praying that they get it right. We activated the city's emergency operations on Sunday to conduct proactive planning. Our hope was that if we planned, it wouldn't be necessary, but if we didn't, we'd probably need it. Because we are, in some instances, a pretty young staff, with David starting on the 15th, Matt starting about a month ago, there was an opportunity for us to get our team together and make sure that we were prepared. So in literally about 3 days' time, we have identified all of our critical infrastructure citywide and their elevation levels. We've mirrored that up with flood stage elevations, so we can begin to monitor as the stage of the river rises. We know what infrastructure will be impacted when, and we have a protocol to manage that appropriately. We've met with TxDOT. We know when their infrastructure is going to be impacted, because clearly if our bridges are impacted, that begins to impact how we maneuver on both sides. As a result of that, we have identified at what point would the river stage have to be at before we would need to stage resources on both sides. We've spent a tremendous amount of time building an evacuation protocol. So we know really important detailed information that we can use depending on how much time we have in the area that may need to be evacuated. As the mayor has said numerous times over this exercise, because she serves as our emergency management director, that all of this information doesn't change. So it doesn't matter whether it's this flood event that we get to dodge or we have some kind of other issue from a hazmat event to whoever, whatever. We have an evacuation protocol that doesn't change. So this is planning that we won't lose. We hope we don't have to use, but we will certainly be prepared. We have a group that has established a traffic management plan that's in concert with our evacuation protocol so that we don't end up with a situation like we see on a Sunday afternoon or a Friday afternoon when we're at gridlock and we can't move forward. We have made contact with all senior living facilities to make sure that they've dusted off their plan. They've made contact with their necessary resources, and the chief has told me that they have excellent plans and they're on point, and we appreciate their support in that. We've worked with our public housing authority to make sure that they are taken care of, as well as some other community resources that have been identified in the event we were to evacuate. We had an awesome meeting yesterday afternoon with a gentleman by the name of Jim Oak, who is the building official in Garland. He coordinates the statewide damage assessment by the Building Official Association of Texas, who is responsible for going into damaged areas like Sonora or Hurricane Harvey and doing the damage assessments of each structures to determine whether or not they're habitable or can't be occupied and putting a price tag on that. He also happens to be the mayor of Prosper in North Texas, so he was able to provide us a ton of information on how that process would work so we can very quickly make those assessments, and for those citizens that were displaced, they could. Lucas, I'm sorry, I said Prosper. Lucas and Prosper are across the street from each other. My bad. So he helped us with being able to anticipate what kinds of questions we may get with the flood so we could have that documentation already available. So if this were to happen, we could set our citizens up for success. We had a team that established a recovery protocol. So while we're planning for this flood event that we hope doesn't happen, we were also planning for recovery should it occur. Sarah and Colin did a number of press releases, not only in real time, but we have written press releases for all possible scenarios related to possible flooding, from possible evacuations to voluntary evacuations to mandatory evacuations. So all we've got to do is plug and play, put in a date, put in a time, and we're ready to go. We are currently conducting internal exercises to test our processes per the National Incident Management System Emergency Operations Center model. And so we're learning our vernacular. We know what to do, but we're making sure it fits the FEMA forms and the FEMA protocol, because we need to get our money back should something happen. I'm going to talk in just a minute. Colin and Sarah have worked on improving the emergency management page on the city's website. I'm going to take you on a quick tour, because this is a very important place for you to go to get some wonderful information. So we're going to continue to monitor the river for the next several weeks. LCRA has indicated to us that it will be elevated. Our river will be elevated in Bastrop through mid-November, assuming that there is no additional rain event. So every time it rains, we'll have to check the soil moisture content, how much rain. And so we're not out of the woods tonight if some additional rain happens here or upstream. So we'll monitor the situation on a daily basis. We encourage all of you to be situationally aware of what's going on in the region and be prepared as well. We will complete our planning exercise Thursday evening. We're going to go through our demobilizing exercises if we had been in a situation on Friday. We're going to hold a debriefing regarding lessons learned, things that we know we did well that we need to document and do again, processes that we've learned that need to be tightened up and what that might look like. And then there's opportunities for additional training, so we just have a higher comfort level in what that might look like. So very quickly, and I'll let you click that one more time. The information page is available. If you will go to our website, www.cityofbastrop.org, and if you look in the the page when it comes up in the upper right-hand corner, you will see an emergency management listed on the tab. If you will click on that, you can pull that down and you will find our emergency management page. There are a couple of things about this that excite me hugely. One is that they are feeding our Facebook page in real time to that website page. So if you don't have access to Facebook, just go to our website and you'll be able to find it there. They've also connected our Twitter feed there as well. So it's fine that you're not on. It's a Twitter. Okay, Twitter. I know when people begin to giggle, my Southern English just kicked in. But if you'll go to that page and you're not on the social media channels, you'll be able to find what you need there. There are all kinds of information relative to preparedness, how to take care of your family, what you need to do to be ready to go at a moment's notice, and it would be awesome if you would begin to use this as a resource when we have an emergency. No, you can go to that page and we're going to update that and take care of it. And I want to brag on our multimedia team because we've seen the mayor being interviewed by Fox 7 as well as the Elgin Courier. The Bastrop Advertiser used statements from our social media accounts for direct quotes in their story. We, in this short window, have posted 27 individual messages that were sent out on multiple social media platforms. Those messages has reached a total of 86,373 individuals on the city's Facebook page alone. That does not count Bastrop Police Department, Fire Department, or our Twitter pages. We've netted 138 new followers on our Facebook page, and then we've had some singular posts that have reached just almost 11,000 clicks. Our photos have been viewed almost 4,000 times. Our stories have been shared 432 times with 1,618 reactions. We are also on Nextdoor. We've done 4 updates there that have reached just over 1,300 people, and we posted some videos that have had really good numbers as well, reached about 2,500 people and been viewed just under 1,600 times. So I can't stress enough how proud I am of our team. They have taken this extraordinarily seriously. They have worked extraordinarily hard and done quality work in a very short period of time to get us to a situation that if we had had an event, and we hope it stays if we'd had, that we were prepared to provide the service you, our citizens, would have needed. So may we dodge the last bullet and this just be proactive planning. But I did want to provide an update to the community to let them know that we take this aspect of our operations very seriously. We are really working to be prepared and will continue to monitor the situation as warranted.
Thank you very much, City Manager. It's been involved in most of this, and it's just a great group of people to work with, and it's nice for everyone to get along. So we're moving right on. We are on item 5D, a proclamation from the City Council of the City of Bastrop regarding Veterans Day. I would encourage everybody to come out to the car show and the Veterans Day celebration, but this is a joint resolution with Bastrop County, whereas we, the Bastrop City Council and the Bastrop County Commissioners Court, come together on Veterans Day to pay tribute to the men and women who serve our great nation with distinction in the United States Armed Forces, both in peacetime and in war. And whereas on Veterans Day, Americans across this land thank our veterans for their service in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard, whether active duty, reserve, or National Guard. And whereas on Veterans Day, our community expresses a continuing sense of gratitude to those who give so much in the defense of the freedoms which we all enjoy. And whereas at this time of special recognition, local veterans organizations, along with Bastrop area cruisers, pay tribute to our veterans by hosting the Veterans Day Classic Car Show. Furthermore, the Red, White, and Blue Veterans of Bastrop County organization will be hosting a banquet to honor our veterans. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Bastrop County Commissioners Court and the Bastrop City Council hereby encourage all citizens to join the celebrations of Veterans Day 2018. If you are a veteran, if you would please stand, we'd like to give you applause. All right, now we're going to talk about Arbor Day. And before we talk about Arbor Day, we have to recognize a person on our staff who is incredible, and I want all of you to be a part of recognizing and celebrating that Thomas Martinez got his certification, and he is a certified arborist. Thomas, if you would please come forward. Congratulations. So Curtis Hancock, we've framed his certification. The test had over 200 questions. It is a long process, and we are very, very proud of you. Congratulations. Thank you. Anything you'd like to tell the crowd, Thomas?
In March, I plan on trying to take my utility arborist test, so we'll see how that goes.
All right, congratulations. Congratulations. Okay, so speaking of Arbor Day, whereas Arbor Day is observed throughout the world in many languages and cultures, and whereas the trees are a renewable resource providing us with paper, wood for our homes, fuel for our fires, and countless other wood products, and whereas trees provide environmental benefits by providing shade for people, our buildings, removing air pollution, abating stormwater runoff, and providing wildlife habitat. And whereas trees in our town increase property values, enhance the economic vitality, I am tired tonight, vitality of business areas, and beautify our parks and streets. And whereas trees, wherever they are planted, are a source of joy and enjoyment, I, Connie Schrader, Mayor of the City of Bastrop, do hereby recognize November 2nd, 2018 as Arbor Day. David Unick will come forward to accept this proclamation. Let's have a round of applause for David. David, come back. There's no picture, it didn't happen. That's right. One, two, three. Okay, we are moving on to the work session and briefing portion. We're on item 6A, receive presentation and update from Verdunity regarding the development of a fiscal impact analysis model. City Manager?
Mayor and council, as a part of the budget process, you approved a contract with Verdunity to help construct a fiscal impact analysis. One of the requests that you made was that Mr. Shepherd would provide an update on the process in October, December, as well as February. For those that may not be familiar with this process, we talked about the need for a fiscal impact analysis as a part of our pre-meeting at 5 o'clock with the code update. Really, the importance of this fiscal impact analysis, as Kevin will show you, is determining what constitutes fiscal sustainability seems like a relatively easy concept, but it becomes complicated very quickly. One of the challenges that has been my experience through the years is you get a model built, but it's only as good as the data that's in the model. And the challenge for us is the bandwidth to be able to keep that updated for the industry standards, and that is what are the construction costs for elements and what is the replacement cost of various things. And so in working with Kevin, there will be an opportunity to get a subscription so that those things are taken care of. When we talked about this back in the budget process, we talked about your commitment to build fiscally sustainable development. And your mandate relative to codes is that we were going to adopt fiscally sustainable codes so that you could build without extra permission fiscally sustainable developments. You also indicated that if it wasn't fiscally sustainable, you weren't real interested in it being built. And so one of the elements in this process will include not only our own city attorney, but we're going to be partnering with some other cities throughout the state so that this model has more of a regional feel. And so Alan's role will be to make sure, to the extent possible, that if we're challenged when you say no on the basis of it's not fiscally sustainable, and we ended up having to go to the Texas Supreme Court, that we have a model that can sustain that level of scrutiny. We are excited at the fact that we are doing what all cities know they know how to do, but nobody's done. And so part of what Kevin's going to be doing every other month is helping us take the journey on how we're creating a model that we hope will set an industry standard in this state and will certainly change the conversation that we have about development patterns that we know doesn't work. So that kind of gets us to this present day so that Kevin can pick up the conversation at this point and move forward with the October update that I pledged to you he would provide.
Well, good evening, Mayor, Council, City Manager. It's good to see some of you again. I remember a few of you from the Cultivate workshop that we did in San Marcos, and then I think I definitely watched all of you talk about our contract before. But my name's Kevin Shepherd. I'm principal and founder with Verdunity. And I'm just going to jump right in because I know everybody's dying to get to the next agenda item and talk about chickens. That has to be the most unique adjacent agenda item for me. But I'm going to start right here. So, and I'm going to tie to Matt's conversation about the zoning throughout this conversation. But every city says that they want to be fiscally responsible, environmentally sustainable, and socially equitable. Every city across this country says that. But in reality, very few of our daily decisions align with those outcomes. I've seen this in my first 15 years working as a civil engineer, then my last, then I got into a national director role as a planning, working across the country, and then now recently, I guess most recently, the last 7 years working at Verdunity. And whether you're in a Detroit or a Ferguson or California or even back in here in Texas, we have, if you look at our places and the way that we're building our cities, in this country, they're not fiscally sustainable. We can talk about environmental issues, we can talk about social issues as well, but a lot of it ties back to fiscal sustainability. And one of the questions that I've been asking city managers, city administrators, council folks, planning directors for about the last 5 years is, when it comes to growth and development in your city, what's the biggest challenge or frustration that you're having? Almost across the board, especially with city managers, the challenge is how do we address the growing wants and needs of our community with flat or limited resources? Some will go all the way to, say, infrastructure, but just across the board, just the growing wants and needs of amenity needs, infrastructure needs, police, fire, all of those things with this constant pressure of keep taxes flat or reduce them. And so bringing that into the zoning conversation and how we build our cities, we're doing a lot of talking past each other. You see citizens that are frustrated if you bring up density or if you bring up certain kind of development projects. They'll come and different groups will come out and talk for or against a project. When you look at a capital improvement program, I don't know when you guys went through your last one and you added up the list of infrastructure projects of your needs and what got funded, but I'm guessing the needs were this and the funding was significantly less, right? What we're missing, or what we have, is a failure to communicate. We are not aligning our decisions in our cities with that goal of fiscal sustainability. You can, as I mentioned, you can talk about environmental and social, but we believe everything that you do in a city can be funneled through money. Everybody understands money, everybody cares about money, and everybody cares about their property taxes and their property values. We can talk quality of life, we can talk other things, but they're a little squishy because different people have different versions of what quality of life is. So this idea of fiscal sustainability as a shared goal or a shared vision for your community, really vetting that and testing that and saying, how committed are we to this, not just in the short term, which a bunch of cities in Texas are doing great right now. You can look in the short term and say, we're kicking butt, we're the best place to live, work, play, and our budgets look great and are growing. But can you sustain that over the long haul? And I challenge pretty much every city in Texas that I work with, and we're starting to do more work outside of Texas now with this as well. But can you sustain that after your growth starts to flatten out and all of those infrastructure costs come due? Most cities in this country can't do it, and that's how you end up with a Detroit and some of those. So having a common language, so you have that common, the vision of fiscal sustainability, and then using fiscal analysis as that common language, whether it's looking at land use or looking at zoning districts, which you're getting into, looking at capital improvement projects and infrastructure design and prioritization. All of those can be tied back to dollars in your community. This is a chart from Fort Worth from back in 2014 that my colleague Felix Landry's back there that he did when he was working with the city of Fort Worth. This is the core, kind of the core downtown circle. What this shows is just revenue. The different colors represent different land uses in Fort Worth. The height of the bars represent the property tax revenue base per acre or per square foot. This is where we're going to start, and I'm going to show you Bastrop's version of this here in a second, or at least our first version of it. Drilling down from that a little bit, and this shows just one example of the potential of where we can go with this. There were, in this previous slide, there were parcels in this area that were vacant, that were undeveloped. And so the city has a decision of how do we develop those vacant parcels. Compare that to Bastrop and greenfield sites that you have in Bastrop and how you might develop them. What you see here is 4 different scenarios of if you built that vacant land out in that area with these 4 different development patterns of single family, apartments, condos, and then the bottom right is mixed use. Based on revenue projections of those different development types that I'll show you how we got to here in a second, you can show how that development would impact that tax rate. So if you held the budget the same and you just built that vacant land out in these different patterns, you can lower that tax rate. The other way to look at this is hold your tax rate flat, and when you develop in different patterns, you generate additional revenue beyond what you're capturing right now, that revenue can then go into closing your gap as well. The next level down to look at this, these are slides from Fulshear, Texas, which is down around Houston, another city that we're working with. most cities will talk about appraised values of properties, so they'll look, regardless of the size of the parcel, they'll say your appraised value is 100,000 or 200,000 or what have you. The real value that a city gets in terms of property tax base is you have to take exemptions out, right? You have to, there's properties that are tax exempt, which is that slide in the middle. So as you go generally from orange to blue here, they get less fiscally productive. So the one on the left, when you just look at appraised values, looks like a lot of these properties are doing well. When you pull out the exempt properties, it starts to drop, or when you factor in exemptions, it drops down a little bit. And then where we like to get this is at the per parcel level. And if you've seen some of Joe Minicozzi's work and the dollar per acre, what we do is we take that property tax base and we divide it by the area of the parcel. So if you have $100,000 on a parcel and it's a 1 acre lot, you would have $100,000 per acre. When you do that and you drill it down on that per acre basis or per square foot basis, you start to see different development patterns perform a lot better. And where this really shows up is when you bring in service costs. I've had a lot of dialogue with Joe Minicozzi and Chuck Marone with Strong Towns about just doing the revenue side versus bringing in the service costs. I believe very strongly that if you're going to use this to evaluate policy and talk about land use and zoning and those types of things, you have to consider the service costs as well. Something that can look good on the surface from a revenue basis may not perform as well when you bring the service costs in. And I'll bring this, I'll mention this just in terms of a single family subdivision as an example. We see a lot of cases where you have wide lots, and the mayor you mentioned this earlier with the conversation about you have a mile of street, mile of water line, you have a certain length or area of infrastructure that you're providing. How can you capture the most value out of that infrastructure? You can get to a place that a single family neighborhood is not generating, the value of those homes is not generating enough to pay for all of the infrastructure that's serving it. And you get into certain development patterns that are significantly more in the red in terms of losing money for the city. And then you have other developments that will generate a lot more in terms of revenue over cost, or what we like to say return on investment. This is another slide from Fulsher. Anybody here familiar with MUDs, municipal utility districts? Okay. Fulsher, 85% of their city is in-city MUDs. I got a call from them about this time a year ago, and they have average $400,000 homes. And the deputy city manager called me and said, "Hey, Kevin, I've seen you talk about some of this stuff. I need your help. We're about to go bankrupt." And the issue was that they had built all of these MUDs in the city. The first 10 cents of their tax rate was being kept by the city to provide police and fire and infrastructure. Everything over that was going back to the MUDs in rebate payments. So they were just slow, kind of a slow bleed. This shows two of those MUDs, and the difference on the left shows the revenue that the city was capturing. On the right shows the revenue that was going to the MUDs. The reason I'm showing you this is when you look at MUDs and how they're set up to be financed, they are set up to cover the true cost of that infrastructure serving that development. So if we talk just in general terms about the discrepancy of what our cities are capturing in terms of revenue to pay for infrastructure, that's a graphic representation of how big the gap can be. So this is Fort Worth, all of Fort Worth, and I know the font is kind of small and hard to read, but what this does is look at the return on investment or the net performance of these different land uses. These are state land use codes, but looks at the net performance of different things from ag, vacant residential, commercial, all the way down through condos, townhomes, apartments, and single family. The blue bars are the best ones to look at, but just to for those in the audience or watching that can't see this, the condos and townhomes are about a 2-to-1 return. Apartments are about 1 1/4, and the single family in Fort Worth was close to break even. I'll point out here though that Fort Worth has a very diverse single family housing stock in terms of the sizes of homes and the sizes of the lots and the configuration of the neighborhoods and the streets and those things. But this was really powerful in just seeing the net performance of different development types. This was based on just their current budget, so the cost based in their budget plus their deficit. So a lot of cities don't have their deficit number quantified. You guys don't, from our understanding right now. We're going to help you get there. But one of the things I challenged Felix with when I first saw this and we started to talk was, where are the true costs to serve these different neighborhoods? Not just what's in the budget. And you will see that as more mature cities, more built out, closer to build out, or ones that have been around a lot longer, have a lot more costs incurred. They've built all their fire stations and all their water towers and and all their streets. So, but you still see, even in places like a Fort Worth or a Dallas, they still are not accounting for all of the true costs of what it's going to take, mostly residential streets. Residential streets is the one that gets overlooked. Well, a lot of cities will have their thoroughfares accounted for. Water and sewer gets taken care of or looked at with enterprise funds, but those residential streets, they will catch up with you. This is just an example of some of the context data that we're going to pull in. These are some different development patterns from Fort Worth. We've got property tax revenue data for, I think, 12 different counties across the state now. We're also in talks with Shreveport, Louisiana, Lake Charles, Louisiana, Indianapolis, a couple of others up in the north. I got a call or an email this morning from Maricopa, Arizona, that wants to talk with us. So there's interest across the country in doing some of this stuff. So we're not only going to bring context from Texas, we're also going to bring context from some of these older aging places that can bring more of the kind of forecasting the future for Texas, for lack of a better term. But these are just some slides that we'll include and put together more context information that show kind of the plan view of what it looks like, just a couple of the renderings or the actual photos of what the development looks like, and then on the bottom shows the different performance. Obviously, this is a very intense, dense, vertical mixed-use project, West 7th in Fort Worth, that is off the charts in terms of fiscal productivity. Here's South Lake Brownstones, South Lake Town Square is another one that a lot of folks are familiar with. So we have different, and we get into some different neighborhood types. So we have all kinds of different ways we can slice and dice this data in terms of land use, zoning districts, different neighborhood types, and we'll ask you through this process how you're most comfortable doing it. We were just having a conversation earlier with Matt about when the right time to look at the zoning districts that are being proposed and how the fiscal information can inform your final districts and what you do. These are three charts from Fate, Texas, who I think most of you guys are familiar with. And their challenge was very similar to Bastrop's. And it's, we're a young city. We haven't built out very much. What does this look like going forward? And how can we improve this conversation? Their leadership gets fiscal sustainability, much like yours does. Not quite to this extent. I will say you guys are off the charts in terms of alignment on this stuff. But their question was, how do we get our citizens and the community at large to understand fiscal sustainability and how and why we need to change our development patterns? So this was a very high level analysis that we did in a short amount of time to make a point. And we're going to do a much more detailed analysis like this for Bastrop. The first chart on the left just showed the net revenue performance, current development on the ground with 2015 property tax data. And it's just a kind of a tiered structure showing which ones are losing money to which ones are making. The second one, we came in, and that was net revenue using their budgeted costs. So we took their property tax revenue data, and then we took the budgeted costs from the general fund and distributed it and got the net number. The second one, we added in the street infrastructure. So in their current budget, they were not accounting for the street replacement. So we added up all the street miles, we put a cost to it, and then put that net number, and as you can see, a lot of the parcels turned in either went from green to red or turned a deeper shade of red. So they went further in the negative. And that was just a kind of a baseline of where are we today. Then the question was, okay, we just did a comp plan, we just did a future land use plan. If we build out our land use plan exactly the way it is using some of the context data that we have, what does that look like? And that's the one on the right. So if they build out their future land use plan by 2050, you can see a couple of places right there in the middle that turn that really dark green. That is some very, we did some zoning work with them, special districts, very intense mixed use stuff. If they're patient and wait for the market to come and get it, that's where it would go. Even with that producing at a very high fiscal level, they end up with a $72 million deficit. And I think Linda asked me this question when we had the staff conversation earlier, and I'll mention it here, but this happened right about the time they were in budgeting, and there were conversations with council about lowering the tax rate. This conversation changed that. The council decided to hold their tax rate where it is and start banking money to take care of some infrastructure. So just that analysis changed some of the conversation. It's giving more, just another way to communicate the challenges that you guys are all feeling on a daily basis with how do we prioritize all these things and how do we communicate this back to our community that truly values fiscal sustainability. So this is the very, very, very first rough cut at your revenue only. Any idea where downtown is? We looked between the staff meeting, we hadn't done it yet, but we went later. The really high peak is where the winery is on Chestnut. There's those 3 two-story buildings right there together. That's those really, really high ones. So what you tend to see is if it's really narrow lots and multiple stories, that's the ones that perform really, really well from a revenue standpoint. When we add service costs, some of these, the first thing I brought up was the neighborhoods over on the left-hand side that are, I believe those are some of the newer, more of the suburban single-family stuff. My question is going to be, when we roll the service cost side into this, how do they look? Do they still show positive, or are they negative? The ways that we're going to be able to play with this is we can look at any comp plan effort or zoning code that we do. I always like to ask the question of you need to offer folks a variety of housing types and neighborhood types for a variety of price points. People are going to go, just like Matt said earlier, people are going to go through different stages of life and want different things. And ultimately, a sustainable city, we talk within our firm of our passion and our vision is for civic vitality. It's a bigger thing than just fiscal, but it's how do you create a community where people of all ages and types and backgrounds are going to want to live and work and play and worship, and most importantly, stay over time. You see a lot of places where people will come and they'll thrive there for a short amount of time, and then for whatever reason they leave and go somewhere else. We want Bastrop to be, we believe, I'm hearing over and over that you guys want Bastrop to be a place for all kinds of people, for all stages of life. And so many places in Texas are not building that diversity of housing. They're not building the different kind of housing and neighborhood types to get that diversity and keep them here. And it ties back to fiscal sustainability as well. What's exciting about the time that we're in right now, and the way the conversation's starting to change with demographics in Texas, is the kind of neighborhoods that whether it's the older folks that are retiring and downsizing from a suburban home into a smaller neighborhood or a smaller home or townhome or something, or the millennials that don't want the home, those also happen to be the kinds of housing and neighborhoods that tend to be more fiscally productive for a community. And they will balance out the more diverse your housing stock gets, and some of the small lots that a lot of the things that Matt is advocating for. If your code goes forward with that, I feel pretty confident, without even doing the numbers, that a lot of what you're trying to accomplish with the code is going to close your gap fiscally as well. What we're going to do is give you the tools to start to play with aligning neighborhoods and service levels with what your citizens are willing and able to pay for. I've been in so many visioning sessions where we'll do a comp plan and we'll say, what does your city want to be? And they throw out all these great things. Well, if you then filter that and say, okay, now what are you willing and able to pay for? in terms of property tax or user fees or whatever different things we're asking you as a citizen to pay for, the conversation changes. And that's what's needed in our process today to get citizens and developers and nonprofits and council and staff members all aligned. Is you have to put some context to all these decisions that are made. Every decision made in a city has a trade-off. There's a cost, and there's a revenue and a cost associated with everything. And in so many cities today, it's all about the revenue. It's what can we bring in today that's going to add jobs, add property value, add homes, add tax base in the short term without the context of the cost on the back end. And I guarantee you, every developer out there, any of us that have worked with developers, they're doing pro formas on their end. They know exactly what their cost is and exactly what they have to get to pay the bills back. Cities need to do the same thing, and they haven't been. Our job in this is to help you guys do that for a broad section of development types. Use the analysis to inform your code. What kind of districts do you need? What kind of mix do you need between, you can have some development patterns that are, quote, loss leaders that cost more to serve than the revenue they bring in. You're going to have some of those, but we can help you answer that question of how much. And I can also, from an engineering standpoint, we can help start to talk about things of street width and what that means in terms of cost. So you don't just go carte blanche and say everything's going to be a 31-foot wide street or 37-foot wide street or whatever, which from a public safety perspective, we might say they need to be wider so that we can have all this. But you have to have a cost aspect to that conversation, because every additional couple of feet width of a street pavement that you build is another sidewalk or trails. So that's where we're at right now in terms of timing. We've been at the baseline on the revenue side for a while. We're starting to move into service costs. We have a number of different sources that we can use from that. City manager mentioned my background as an engineer. We keep a lot of cost data for the infrastructure side that we will keep updated, not just for Texas as a state, but also within the regions. We've also got data from other parts of the country that we're going to be working with, both on revenue and service costs that we'll tie to. Some of the trickier stuff is going to get into the cost of like public safety, police and fire and some things like that. We've got ways to dig in and get to that. We had a first conversation with staff this afternoon that's going to help us take the first step at coming up with something, and then we'll have to come back and vet it. But we're going to get you to a point back to that fate slide that you saw right here. That second chart is kind of our first deliverable our first main deliverable to you. It's going to be, what's the net revenue performance of your current stuff that you have on the ground? And then we're going to ask you the question, and that Felix and I were just talking before I came up here, of when we look at projecting forward, since you guys are in a little bit of transition, do we project your future land use plan as you have it right now going forward, or do we start to coordinate and try to work with Matt's group on the zoning and project out and inform those zoning districts and how that might change? So back to the timing, I did not know Matt's timing on the zoning when I put this together, but I think they're going to sync up pretty well. So not the design rodeo was the first one, right? So the second one is where, the second one's where they'll be looking at the codes. So that would be the one where we can bring some fiscal information and start to have, some numbers to kind of coordinate with the conversations about the different zoning types. Questions?
Thank you, Kevin. Council, do you have any, Councilmember Jones, turn your mic on.
I just want to say that personally, I don't want projections as to where we would go if we were going the direction we were going before we decided we were going to change directions. I just think that's a waste of time. I think it's fine for us to look at where we are, but I think all of our efforts should be where we need to go. I mean, because you asked that question, and that's my opinion. I just wanted to put that out there and see what y'all think.
So what you're saying is if we're going to be looking at scenarios, we should be looking at the things that are going to change, because I believe we've all said the option of doing nothing and leaving everything like it is isn't really an option. So why would we don't really need to see the projections on it, is what you're saying. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. I appreciate that input. It may well end up being a number we have to come up with for an interaction with the public of, because we will be asked, well, what if you didn't do anything? So I understand what you're saying, and we certainly want Verdunity to be as practical as they can. There's a part of me that thinks we may ultimately, that may be a number that we have to, even if we just rough it, to be able to justify why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, that's a very common question, is like, what's our deficit right now? How far in the hole? Okay, this all makes sense to us. What's our number? You know, how far in the hole are we, and when are we going to hit it? That's the second part. That's a little trickier, but if you're comfortable with a ballpark number, you know, but I do agree with where you guys are and where you're going. It helps, you want to have that baseline so you can point back to it. And I mean, it just like, I like to make the analogy to, or the comparison to a company. If you've got a company that is in trouble, new CEO comes in, he's going to do a baseline assessment and say, here's where we are, here's where we're trying to get to, what's our key metrics, and set some targets to get to. We have to have a baseline to say, here's your gap, because when we come back to updating this on a regular basis, the goal is, whatever that gap is,
To see it diminish.
we're working to close that incrementally over time.
But that's completely different from doing a detailed analysis, and I think that's your point.
Yeah, which is my point. So,
Councilmember Jones, I do think the baseline is important, because if we know whether we've got a $50 million, $75 million, or $100 million deficit, that will weigh heavily on the choices that you make moving forward and what decisions that you make in each one of those zoning districts. I'll use a more common vernacular, because you've got to bridge that gap. And so I think if he doesn't provide that, then we don't have some really key information to make the decisions today, but it will also impact not only as we grow, but we have to put together an annexation plan. And I really think that annexation plan deserves to have this fiscal sustainability built into that, because if we work that model and there are extenuating circumstances that are geographically or environmentally based and it can't produce money, you want to know that and have a real reason for annexing that you may not otherwise see or do. So I think it's the GPS coordinate. In order to know where you're going, you have to know where you are. So it's that first point to be able to establish what that second point needs to be.
Which I think we're all saying the same thing, because
I
I'm
think
not
so.
talking about baseline, I'm talking about
Right.
exactly what you said. So may I ask him another question?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So you said you've worked with Matt before?
Yeah, Matt and I did the Cultivate Collaborative workshops together. So Matt and I know each other well. This is going to be the first time that we've done this kind of collaboration together, but I think we'll be all right.
So the second part of that question is, you know, when you're working on valuations like this, there always comes a point, or there seems to be a point, where there's something, you don't know what you don't know. So my question to you is, just in this process of getting to where you are right now, was there anything that you've come across that was just kind of, wow, that is, you know, really surprising? Okay, now you figured that out and you've added it, but I just was kind of curious about that part.
Man, that's a great question. I will say the biggest aha for me goes back to before this modeling happened, and back when, I mean, starting as an engineer, thinking that this is the way we design our places, right? And thinking I'm making money for cities and making them better. And then when I got asked to serve in that national director of planning and started to go around to different places, and my dad worked for Shell, so we bounced around all over the place growing up. Got to live in Europe for a little bit too, which is an important context of the way they build places over there is very different than here. But when I started the real aha moment was traveling around and seeing some of those places, and then coming back to North Texas where I was based. And I started to think about, in California, I would say everything's about environmental stuff. No, the reason they're doing things in California the way they are now, it's about the money. They're doing things differently in California now because the costs are higher and they have more constraints. We are headed the same way as Texas today is California 20 years ago. A lot of people in Texas don't like to hear that, but we are doing the same exact things that got California their 16-lane highways with nobody moving, and water issues and affordable housing issues. If you don't build a diversity of housing, you will end up with overpriced, you will end up with that. But that kind of, that aha, and then coming back to Texas and seeing, okay, we're building all of this stuff the same way, faster. I was like, what are we doing differently that's going to keep us from being some of these other places? I was born in St. Louis. I went to Ferguson back 20 or 30 years ago. Best place to live, work, play, growing, awesome place. We all know what Ferguson is today, right? I also lived in San Bernardino, Texas, or San Bernardino, California. I asked my dad this question: what was San Bernardino like? Affordable. It was great schools. It was a great place to move to as a young family. They filed for bankruptcy a few years ago. So I saw some of those things. I think in doing this work over the last 7 years and just researching and chipping away at this, I'm so thankful for you guys and the leadership, and especially to Linda, to take this step, because it's easy to go to other places in other parts of the country that are already struggling. They get this stuff so fast, and all the rules are out the window. I mean, it's desperate. It's not about all of this stuff that we talk about in our codes today. It's about how do we keep the people that we have left here, and how do we try to revitalize ourselves. The last thing that I'll mention was actually a conversation that I had at the Strong Towns North Texas gathering last 2 weeks ago, that Linda came up and presented me with, and there were 5 people from Detroit that came down for that, and I had a conversation with a couple of them, and also had a similar conversation with someone up in Indiana. Their strategy for that region is, they're like, we know North Texas, we know Texas is the place to be right now. It's high quality of life, lower cost of living, everybody's moving there. They're like, we've been there, we were that place. And look, so they're revitalizing, they're reinvesting, they're getting funky and cool and all that stuff. And their plan is, when Texas starts to get unaffordable and has infrastructure issues and bridges and highways we can't maintain, guess where they think everybody's going to come? And I told that to our regional MPO, NCT COG. I had a meeting with Michael Morris and some of his direct reports up there that the following Monday after that, our conference call with them, and I told them that, and they're like, whoa. So it's, Lewis McLean will call it the Texas swagger, right? We think everything is going so well in Texas right now. Just look to other parts of the country and go back and look, 20 or 30 years ago of how they were building, and we are on that track. The beauty, what I'm so fired up about here, the opportunity that we have for Texas, and why I'm so passionate about focusing so much of our firm's time on Texas, even if it's harder work, is if we can take just a sliver of the energy and the money and the wealth and the resources that are coming into this region and redirect them just a little tiny bit, we do have potential to be what I think is the first sustainable region or state in this country, beyond like a New York City. So it's very, very exciting. It is an uphill battle to get most city managers to have, and councils, honestly, to have the courage to go forward with some of this. But the exciting thing is when we've been able to start to have this conversation, it unlocks so many conversations and dialogues with citizens that you're having so much trouble with right now, and that's kind of back to the common language thing that we've started to use, is we kind of discovered that through, just through working on this. So lots of lessons learned, but we're ready to put the pedal down and apply it and put everything that we've got and know into Bastrop's model.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Councilmember Jones, did you have something else?
Yeah, I wanted to point out, you really hit the nail on the head. I think it's why we got the quality of city manager we got with Linda, the quality of our attorney, the quality of our planning department. And what you see with Matt and you is that people that are really good at what they do are wanting to participate with Bastrop, because we are on the forefront of solving an entire region's problem before it happens. And you can really see that when you're on council, and it's going to become more and more obvious, I think, as time goes by. But I think that's why it's pretty exciting to be in Bastrop right now and be working with people like you and Matt and so forth. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Jones. Council, any other questions for Kevin? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And so when will we see you again?
Whenever you want me.
December.
Yeah. I think trying to time it, we'll see how it times up with
Well,
that
we only
rodeo.
have one meeting in December, so it'll be the 13th.
And it'll work out because I think they're going to come back and participate in the code rodeo. We meet that Tuesday and immediately start on Wednesday, so it'll work out and great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I believe that 6B won't take very long. Update on Chicken Rooster's relocation process in the downtown area, and then we will take a quick bio break after that. Chief Altgeld.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council, City Manager. I am here today in response to a request from Councilmember Jones about an update on what's been taking place with our chickens. And it's trapping and relocation process. But first I want to give you some history about our animal services call from October 24th to today. We had 62 calls for services that involved the animal services officer. 5 of those calls were related to chickens and roosters. 4 of those were self-initiated, which meant that when we went out, checked traps, fed traps, moved traps, we initiated a call so that we could track that activity. The one call that we had was that took place with the patrol officer responding about a rooster, and before the officer got to the call, they decided they no longer needed the officer and the rooster was not a problem anymore, so he was canceled en route. Year to date, we have trapped and relocated successfully 101 chickens or roosters, thanks to the services of Mr. Dan Huppner, our chicken wrangler. We have plans to continue trapping and relocating the chickens in mid-November. We took a break in October when he went on vacation, and we have traps out and we're moving accordingly. Some concerns that have been, yes ma'am.
And Chief, that's by design. When we talked about this plan and put it together, chickens and roosters, believe it or not, are really smart animals and they figure out the trapping situation. So we trap 1 month and we're off a month. We trap a month and we're off a month. So his vacation corresponded with our off month that was already predetermined.
Yes, thank you. So there have been some concerns about some incidents that have taken place with chickens as far as possibly the cages have been tampered with, and that was true several months ago. We placed some game cameras at various locations to see if we could capture who was doing that. There are also reports of people dropping their feral chickens in the city and leaving them. We haven't been able to substantiate that. But going back to 60-day, what it shows is that we're receiving a lot of information via third-hand, fourth-hand party because of social media. And so people are posting things on Nextdoor, and it circulates around through the community until it reaches somebody who asks questions about it. What we ask and what we really need to happen is that if we have prompt reporting of any concern, whether it's crime-related or in this particular case, nuisance animals or animal services related or code enforcement, we ask that if it's an emergency, call 911. The Bastrop County Emergency Communication Center will take your call. They will categorize it and prioritize it correctly, and we'll respond to the call. If it's not an emergency, then this number I spoke to the director this afternoon, Don Adams, 512-303-7000, is a direct line into the communication center. You won't be on a phone tree. When it's answered by a live human being, and we'll take your non-emergency call. Once again, they will prioritize it, put it in the queue, and we'll respond to it in a timely manner. We do not have the resources. We're not equipped to monitor every social media platform, and frankly, we're having a difficult time responding in real-time manner because we're not receiving the reports in real-time manner. So what I urge is that when you talk to your constituents, to please tell them, please call the police. And with all due respect, not you, because by the time it comes from you through the chain to us, the problem's already, old and stale, and our best success for resolving problems is to respond in a timely manner, and we can't do that if they're not reported in a timely manner. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. Councilmember Jones?
Okay, so, the way that I understand it to date is that there's been I don't know what the minimum is for a felony for theft. Do you know what that is?
Yes, ma'am, I do. It's
What is it?
$1,500, ma'am.
Then there's been felony theft, there's been criminal trespass, there's been interfering with city business over this. And I don't like it.
Okay.
We made a decision to handle this, and there are people in the community that are deciding to steal, to trespass, and interfere. And I personally, I think at some point in the very near future, I'm going to advocate for us ticketing people who are taking care of these chickens and have them in their yard. You cage them or you're going to be ticketed. And I know that I've personally been given pictures of people who have been trespassing, releasing chickens. I think it's the same people that took Dan's Hepker's cage, which is a felony. And I'm just going to right now ask them to return it because I would like to turn those pictures over when I get permission from the people that provided those for me, and I want them prosecuted.
So I'm going to say and echo your concerns that the theft of the trap is very egregious. It doesn't rise to the level of a felony. When we talk about fair market value, it's just under $1,500, but theft is theft, and I don't want to quibble about a dollar amount. It's still very egregious. A formal police report has not been filed yet to date for that. And so when Mr. Hebner files that report, we will move accordingly. And I would urge that if that happens, that you secure permission to release those photos to us so that we can conduct a successful investigation. I'd be more than happy to talk to you offline about the intricacies of criminal trespass, and when I walk onto your yard, while it's not my property, it doesn't rise to the level of a criminal offense unless it's marked in certain ways, and we can talk about that, and it'd be probably a little longer of a discussion than what we would have here this evening, but I'm available anytime to answer those questions, ma'am.
Thank you, Chief. Council, any other questions for Chief Altgeld? Okay, it is 7:58. We are going to take a 5-minute break. We are in recess at 7:58. Okay, it's 8:04, and I've got council members going, let's go, let's go. So we are on item 7A, receive monthly report from Visit Bastrop, and we are pleased to see the new president and CEO, Susan Smith. And Ms. Smith, the floor is yours.
Council members, Mayor, council members, thank you. I'm delighted to be here and very happy to report on our activities and highlights and of some goals for the month of September, which I was here for 1 week of that. I'm now entering my 4th week on board, so very excited. Whoops, wrong one. Do you want me just to go ahead? Okay, so one of our lodging industry reports shows that Bastrop is up over 7% over our comparatives that we use to track our results, and over year to date we are about 1 or 2% higher than our comparatives as well.
Ms. Smith, since they're having problems getting it on, if you're looking at the packet, we're on about page 113, so people can follow along. Go ahead.
Okay. And also I just want to point out that our social media stats are up 15% on Facebook and 12% on Instagram, and that's due to the digital campaign that took place. It was a gap campaign for paid Google and Facebook posts, so that basically that Visit Bastrop didn't go in the dark until I came on board. Our 6-month growth on the website traffic, we're continuing to gain momentum, and that's all of our campaigns are basically driving traffic to our website. We have noticed that our under industry averages, there's you'll see the red stoplight, if you will, and that just shows that our duration is a little bit down on average duration. That's nothing to be alarmed about. It's just basically when there's a paid promotion, people tend to go right to that promotion, click on it, and then get right out. So they're not staying around as long. And so whenever you have a paid promotion like that, you'll see that the duration may be a bit smaller or shorter. Any questions on that? Okay, the next page, which is the overview of our September highlights. We had an ad placement in the USA Today Go Escape Winter Edition. It's out now, and it will be out for people to grab up until December of 2019, and that has a reach of over 7,000 people. We had a total reach of over 17,000 in the PR campaign and the press release for Cody Hopkins. And our media pitches, we had 7 media pitches last month, and thank you, Sarah. 7 media pitches last month, and one of those in particular we know was picked up, which is Inspirations and Celebrations, Luxury Travel Hotels for Fall Foliage and Viewing, where we focus on Bastrop and the Hyatt. Our event submissions for the month of September, we had 11 publications that picked up 5 different events. Thank you. Oh, that's small. 5 different events with a total reach of over 662,000. And additional highlights that we have for the month was we transitioned to our new leadership, and some of the community meetings that we took place in part of were the Bastrop area cruisers, the Lost Pine Christmas, the Hyatt presentation, Play Bastrop meeting, and myself and one staff member are attending the Best Leadership Program. You'll also notice something new on our summary this month, and that is where we will start measuring our performance and sharing our metrics with you on a monthly basis. So you'll see that there's leads, lead room nights, attendees, and then definite room nights, definites, and then number of attendees, as well as leads assisted and definite assisted room nights and attendees. So right now there's no numbers in here. We have not been tracking those prior to my arrival. We will be tracking those on a monthly basis and have fun watching those numbers grow every month. If anybody wants to know what the actual definitions of what makes up a lead or a lead assist or a definite assist, feel free to give me a call and I can explain them more next month when we have actual numbers as well. So it's been a great month, and very productive September, and looking forward to a great report for October.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. I noticed on your new metric, and you and I visited about this on the phone briefly, that the lost room nights and the reason. I think that's really critical, because then it's she's gathering that data. Is there something that we can fix, or did we lose it for a particular reason? We can just be keeping track of that. So I was really glad. I personally want to tell you, I was really glad to see you add that metric.
It is a very important metric to understand why we're losing business and where to. If anyone has any questions on the layout of the new report or any concerns about it, let me know. If not, if you like it, then we'll go forth with it.
Council, any questions for Ms. Smith?
I like the logo for sure.
Thank you.
Yes, and I think council's fine with the brevity. We hit the highlights is what we're looking for. Councilmember Ennis?
I think it's so much easier to digest.
Great.
It is much nicer to see the whole report. I do have a question on your social media stats on the Facebook, the slide before, it doesn't matter. It said that you were increased 15%. Is that actually a 15% or is that a point?
I'm sorry, 0.15%.
Okay, because I was going to notice that Instagram was a 12% without the point, so I was just curious, make sure my eyes were seeing what you were seeing.
Mine weren't. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rogers. Any other questions? Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to town.
Thank you.
All right, Council, we're now moving on to item 7B, receive presentation on the quarterly investment report for the period ending September 30th, 2018. Ms. Waldron.
Uh-oh. All right. So yes, and as a part of the investment policy that I bring you a quarterly report. This report is for the period ending September 30th. Our portfolio summary as of that period is $28.8 million. We earned 112, almost 113,000 in interest in this quarter, and we have a year-to-date, which is our fiscal 18 total of 385,472 total earned interest for this quarter. I know it's kind of small, but our diversity in our portfolio, 54% is CDs and securities, 44% is in pooled. We have 1% in demand deposits and 1% in money market accounts.
I just want to clarify, because you said that we had earned $385,472 this quarter, and that's
this year.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
The 113,000 was for the quarter.
Wonder what our portfolio looks like, because that's an
That
awful
must be
good
really
return.
good, huh? 113 for the quarter, which is still really good.
Council, any questions for Ms. Waldron?
I do.
Councilmember Ennis?
Since I don't have those figures in front of me, how does that compare with, say, last year, so far this year?
And I meant to pull that, so I would have it. It is up from last year.
It is, that's all I wanted.
It is up because we're continuing to see the rates. They're climbing, they're just climbing slowly. And the outlook, the economic outlook that I get some notifications on, the economic outlook is still continuing to grow. So we'll see some more increases in the interest as we go along.
Great, congratulations on this amount.
Thank you, Councilmember Ennis. Council, any further questions? Thank you very much, Ms. Waldron. All right, Council, we're now on item 7C, receive report from Bastrop Economic Development Corporation. We have a new Executive Director, Mike Camerlander, and the floor is yours, Mr. Camerlander.
Good evening, Council, Mayor, City Manager. Like Susan, I'm new as well. This is week number 6. So my report will continue to grow as well as we start tracking things that I want to track and think you all should know about. So patience as I build that report, but with that, I'll get into my presentation. First of all, last Monday we had our BDC board meeting. We sat 2 new board members that were appointed by the mayor and council. Jeff Haldina and Pat Crawford returns to the board. I'm very excited to have them on, and they took the place of Ken Chavez, our previous board chairman, and of course, Councilmember Rogers, now on this council, stepped off as well. Our new board chair is Catherine Nash, who's been on the board for a little while now, so we're excited to have her leadership at the board level. At our board meeting, we passed this resolution addressing the Agnes gap and to design that Agnes gap between where our project ends at Seton and where it connects with Agnes on the other end. So now we can go forward with the city planning and make sure that the roads down there line up and create a nice block I'm sure planning will be very happy with in the future. So it was important. There it is. That yellow is not real. It's just kind of showing you what we addressed. So you can see there was quite a significant gap, and we think planning for this gap will help development in this area in the future tremendously. So thank you for the city to step up and take that in the interim, but we have completed that now. And I don't know why that did that. Sorry. So for September, Jean on our staff went to Opportunity Austin marketing trip to San Francisco. There was 34 total meetings. We had 7 meetings in San Francisco with companies there to tell them about Bastrop and why they should come to Bastrop and open up shop. 7's about right for an OA meeting trip. It's about 3 to 4 a day. It's a 2-day trip. So if you get 7 to 8, it's a really good trip. So they focus on technology, biolife science, hospitality, so all things that we believe are good fits for Bastrop. We're also attending Austin Chamber Investors Breakfast, where there are updates for Circuit of the Americas, as well as Army Futures Command. If you don't know what Army Futures Command is, it's going to be a really big deal for the Austin region as a whole. And so we're going to start reaching out to suppliers to the military, DoD contractors, that need to be close to Austin, but don't necessarily need to be in Austin. Those are our targets, and we think we can have a pretty good success with this new command. I don't think any of us really truly understand yet how big it is for the region, but it's going to be enormous as we move forward. We also attended IAMC in September. First time we've tried it. We're going to try it a couple times, but basically site selectors and asset managers for companies go to this, and so it's a really good time to network with decision makers for companies, and let them know that this is a cost savings. If you come here, we can help you with those things. It's like any sales position, because that's really all economic development is sales. It's all about relationships. So this one is going to be one where we are going to have to go a couple times to really understand if it's worth the investment, which of course we're going to track, and if it's not worth it, we'll stop going. But it's something that other economic development organizations have had success with, and something we wanted to try out. So stay tuned for that. We also went to the First Responders Luncheon, like the mayor mentioned earlier, NAI Global Conference. It was in Austin, so really easy to take advantage to things that are 30 minutes up the road. Went to Elgin for the best breakfast. IEDC in Atlanta, where Jean was actually a speaker for our workforce development program we've established here. And we continue to get outreach from even organizations in Texas that want to learn how we did it. And so we're becoming quickly a go-to source for other EDOs in Texas as how to do this right. So we're going to continue to promote that and let people know that we are that resource and we know what we're doing, and continue to elevate our stance in the state. And then also Texas Downtown Association Regional Roundtable we attended. We give this report to our board, just kind of give you an update on 380 agreements. For the Buc-ee's agreement, we've pushed out about $510,000 out of the total $700,000  380 agreement we had for sales tax revenue. So they are well, and I know, Mayor, you want to see dates. Haven't been able to get to that yet. We're going to add dates so you know where we are in the time frame. But I believe they opened in 2012, so we're 6 years into this out of a 10-year agreement, and we've paid 5/7 of it. So they're well ahead of schedule. We anticipate that it won't take the full 10 years, which means we'll start collecting 100% of that sales tax sooner than we anticipated. So it's really good news. Burleson Crossing's on the same path. It's performing better than we anticipated. We've paid out almost $1.6 million with $900,000 left to go. So both really good projects, and we'll soon be reaching the end of those. And then we'll, of course, give you updates on current projects as we move forward. Any questions? So moving forward, I'm going to start providing you industry leads that we're getting, how many per industry, aggregate numbers. Given that October 1 was a new fiscal year, we're kind of starting. So my next one will show you what we got in October, and we'll start moving forward with those numbers. So like I said, still building it, but we'll give you metrics as we start to actually collect them.
Great, thank you. Council, any questions for Mr. Camerlander? Councilmember Ennis?
Outstanding report. Thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate you saying, I know you want the years. I knew that it's two things. It's when are they paid off, and are they on track or are they behind? So
Absolutely.
I really appreciate, but I thought that was a great way to present where we were. So appreciate that very much. All right, thank you very much. We're now moving on to citizen comments. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone signed up for citizen comments?
No, Mayor.
So we are now done with citizen comments. We are now on the consent agenda. Council, do I have anyone that wants to pull anything from the consent agenda? There are 3 items. Seeing none, is there anybody in the audience that wants a consent agenda pulled? Madam Secretary, if you'll read the consent agenda.
The consent agenda reads as follows. Item 9A, consider action to approve City Council minutes from the October 9th, 2018 meeting. Item 9B, consider action to approve the second reading of ordinance number 2018-29 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, rezoning 1.95 acres of building block 62 east of Water Street from SF7, Single Family 7 to C1, Commercial 1, located at 303 and 305 Martin Luther King Jr. Drive, within the city limits of Bastrop, Texas, as shown in Exhibits A and B, including a severability clause establishing an effective date. Item 9C, consider action to approve the second reading of Resolution Number 2018-102 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, approving the terms of an economic development performance agreement between the Bastrop Economic Development Corporation and 921 Bastrop, LLC, approving the terms of an agreement for construction of improvements to the lot at 921 Main Street with 921 Bastrop, LLC, in an amount exceeding $10,000, attached as Exhibit A, repealing all resolutions in conflict, providing severability, and providing an effective date. This concludes the consent agenda.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Council?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
I had a tie, so I'm going to say Councilmember Ennis made the motion and Mayor Pro Tem Nelson made the second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Ennis.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson.
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson.
Yes.
Councilmember Jones.
Yes.
Thank you, council. The motion passes unanimously. The consent agenda is approved. We're now moving on to items for individual consideration. We're on item 10A. Consider action and approve resolution number R 2018-108 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, making determinations regarding certain project-specific exceptions and/or exemptions as provided by Emergency Ordinance 2018-1, Section 8, and Emergency Ordinance 2018-2, Section 7. Ms. Bills.
Good evening. So tonight I have 3 different exemption requests, and they're all for single-family projects. And they're all actually in Tahitian Village. So I've kind of done an overall map of the area. The first request is over off of Kanapali, or however you say that one. And then the other 2 are off of Mauna Kea and Tahitian Drive. These 2 are within the city limits. This blue line is the city limits line. The third is within our 1-mile ETJ. So the first request is for 463 Kanapali Lane. The request is actually, the project they're doing this time is just an amending plat. They are wishing to combine the 2 lots into one to build a house in the future. They don't have any plans to build it today. They're looking a couple of years out. There had been a previous house at this location that was built over the lot line, and so the driveway currently exists. The future project will be a single-family house with an attached garage. The total lot, once the 2 lots are combined, will be 2.043 acres in size. There's 2,520 square feet of existing impervious cover, and they're going to add another 1,950 square feet for a total of 5% impervious cover for the whole 2-acre site. The engineer letter that details out the soil conditions and the runoff shows that it'll have an increase of 0.28 cubic feet per second of water in a 100-year storm. So you can see this is the kind of an aerial of the area. Currently, they have the driveway going to the vacant lot. And when you look at the topo for the area, this is the lot in question, and the water drains to the back of the lot. That's the already existing drainage pattern, and then it eventually flows over to this creek, which is the natural topography in Tahitian. Any questions on that one?
So, Ms. Bills, as a reminder to council, this is one of those, the only reason you can't approve it is because it's a number bigger than 0.
Yes.
But staff is in agreement.
In agreement, yes.
Council, any questions on this one? Councilmember Ennis?
You said it drains the back of the lot?
It does. It drains to the back of the lot to the creek that is over here. So in the aerial.
Well, but the engineer's report said it drains the front of the lot. I'm not trying to catch you.
It flows to both directions. So if you look at the topography, this is actually the very top of the hill. It's at a flat spot. So the back part of the lot would drain this way, but they're not. They're proposing most of the impervious cover on the front side, so that the runoff would be to the street at that point. So everything, basically in this lot, everything drains kind of out.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, council? Councilmember Rogers?
Do we want to approve each one like we did last time individually?
Jennifer's saying yes, please do.
Then I move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion to approve exemption request 463 Kanapali Lane from Councilmember Rogers and a second from Councilmember Ennis. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson.
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson.
Yes.
Councilmember Jones.
Yes. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Bills. You may continue.
So the next site is on Tahitian Drive. It doesn't have an address yet because it's currently vacant. It's lot 1,120. The arrow, you can see, there are some other developed houses on the street, and it's near the edge of the city limits. They're proposing a single-family house with an attached garage. The lot size is a little less than 1/4 of an acre. The total impervious cover that they will be adding is 2,100 square feet, which is about 20% impervious cover for the whole lot. That'll increase the drainage by 0.32 cubic feet per second. This is one that we actually, when we met with the builder, when you look at, trying to find the topo. When we looked at the lot, they actually own both lots, and they were originally kind of intending to put the house in the middle. But as you'll see, this is the start of the creek right there. And so after reviewing it, they did decide to stay on to just the one lot and move it out over so that they weren't encroaching into that waterway. So this is one case where having an engineer look at it and having that discussion did help the in design. The current lot is vacant with some trees and well grassy. So you can see this is the creek right here that the water will drain into and then goes through the actual creek bed. Any questions on this one?
Councilmember Jones?
So ultimately, are both lots going to be encumbered by that project, or are they separating them, or are they both going to be?
Their intention is to keep them together as one property, but only stay on the one side, so they didn't have to amend the plat. You can't build over a lot line, so this way they're maintaining the setbacks and the respect to the lot, so they're not encroaching. They could in the future sell it off, however, it's got some development challenges because it is the creek.
Councilmember Peterson?
Move for approval.
Second.
I have a motion to approve from Councilmember Peterson for Tahitian Drive Lot 1-1120, a second from Councilmember Jones. Is there any further discussion? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yes.
Councilmember Jones?
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson? Councilmember Rogers?
Yes.
Thank you, Council. The motion passes unanimously. Ms. Bills?
And the last request is for Mauna Kea, which is lot 529. The area is right behind the restaurant and the old tennis courts. The proposed site is vacant currently, and they're proposing a single-family house with an attached garage. The site is 0.23 acres, and they're proposing to do 2,100 square feet of impervious cover, which is 20.1%. The study, the letter from the engineer actually details that the study plans for up to 50% impervious cover, and that would not increase any runoff due to the soil conditions. The soil in this area is a highly infiltrated soil that even when wet, the water will still drain into it. So, which is, if you kind of look in the aerial, is kind of close to the WCID's well site. So this area is where the water soaks in incredibly well.
It's sand is what she's trying to tell you. Okay.
It's a technical way.
Move to approve.
I have a motion.
Second.
I have a motion to approve from Mayor Pro Tem Nelson and a second from Councilmember Ennis for Mauna Kea Lot 529. Is there any further discussion? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis?
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers?
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yes.
Councilmember Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Bills, I have to take this moment to tell you how much I appreciate you doing this work. I know it's a lot of extra work. You've provided us excellent information. The maps are really helpful, and it also makes me happy to know that we have kept a citizen from building a house in a place that was going to cause them and people in the future trouble. So yes. I know you and your whole department have worked really hard through this, and I just want to tell you thank you.
Thanks.
All right, we're done with you. You may sit down. We're on to item 10B. Consider action to approve resolution number R2018-93 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, awarding a community support service agreement for services associated with operating, marketing, and providing cultural art and theater services to the Bastrop Opera House at a cost of $92,500, attached as Exhibit A, authorizing the city manager to execute all necessary documents for the contract, providing for a repealing clause, and establishing an effective date. Ms. O'Brien.
Mayor, Council, this has been quite a journey. I want to say thank you to the City Attorney. We have spent quite a bit of time the last 6 weeks going through and trying to come up with a standard agreement that we can use when we are contracting for services. So whether that be our community support funding that goes to different organizations in town that provide quality of life services to our citizens, or whether that's for our cultural arts organization or recreation services, we really wanted to create a standardized agreement so that we're not spinning our wheels every time one of these agreements comes to you guys. And so Alan and his team did an excellent job of putting a standard agreement together that is sort of multiple choice. So we can go through based on the type of funding that's being provided and the type of services and really tailor it pretty quickly to the different groups. And so this will be the first three of this new type of standard agreement. And the first one is for the Bastrop Opera House, as the mayor mentioned. We do have one issue on this one I want to point out. Item G in their community services funding agreement should have been marked out. The city attorney assures me that this is a draft document until you guys approve it and you're able to make any changes you would like tonight before the city manager signs it.
Okay, I think what you said is not what you meant to say. We're looking at page 212, and there is an item that has no letter next to it at all. And item G is the audit, and I don't think you're asking us to strike the audit.
And it's G on the one that was in the agenda shared drive. So the one I printed out today, I apologize. I'm not sure what happened there.
Council, you're seeing the same thing I'm seeing? Okay, because that's all we have access to.
So is it a paragraph that talks about overhead, a portion of the grant funds?
Yes.
So I apologize.
So it has no letter on it, and you're saying that's we would strike that from this document?
Yes, ma'am. We need to strike the section paragraph with no letter on it that's in the agenda packet that talks about the overhead, because we do not fund the Opera House for staff at this time. As you guys know, the Opera House presented last month. They have done a tremendous job last year and have a very exciting season programmed already this year. If you have not been to catch one of their shows, I believe Sleepy Hollow is going on right now. I encourage you to check that out. And Lisa Holcomb, the executive director of the Opera House, is in the audience if you have any questions for her.
Councilmember Ennis?
So just to reiterate, this contract has been approved by the city attorney and is ready to be signed once we approve it.
Once we delete the paragraph that has no letter in front.
Correct. Thank you.
I think there's some other problems because it references Exhibit D and Exhibit E, and Exhibit D is blank and Exhibit E is not included in the document that we have.
So, and I apologize, and I am not sure what happened. So Exhibit E is the hotel occupancy tax use policy?
Nope, that's Exhibit D.
Okay, for some reason, the ones that I literally printed off this afternoon are a little bit different when what's in the packet, and I apologize. I should have printed the packet directly instead of what was saved on the agenda drive. So I apologize for that. The hotel occupancy use policy will be attached at a later date. We will send that to the city attorney for review. We had some discussions about that this summer. There were no changes made to the policy at that time, and so I was just waiting to get clarification on that, and that's why it was not in the packet last week. But it will be attached for review because there have been no changes to that document.
Okay, and then the contract also references hot funding accountability standards and deliverables as Exhibit E, and we don't have anything on that at all in any of the contracts.
And I apologize. That's actually, it's the same thing that's in the city's modified services plan. So I had originally called it that in last year's funding agreements that we did with everyone. And the way that Alan's team rewrote these contracts in a standardized template is that the organization presents what they're going to present for services in the funding agreement, and then the city attaches as their modified services plan those deliverables that we would like to see. Okay. And so the accountability standards no longer apply or exist, and I apologize, that verbiage needs to be removed from those contracts.
Okay, so any reference to Exhibit E needs to be completely taken out, and then Exhibit C has been reviewed or is going to be reviewed?
Eileen reviewed them in Alan's office, so I don't think Alan has reviewed C, but Eileen in Alan's office got the entire packet, I believe, last week. But we will have them look it over once more.
And it's not
just
C,
to
it's
be-
D. Thank you. Councilmember Rogers and Councilmember Jones are both saying that. Exhibit D says hotel occupancy tax policy, and that's all we have. And you're saying Eileen's reviewed that and you will be
Not the
adding it?
hotel, I thought you meant the modified services plan. No, the hotel occupancy use tax policy has not been amended or changed by this council. And so I am not sure if Alan's team has seen it because it was a document that was previously
Mayor
adopted.
and council, I'm going to request that these 3 items be pulled until we can get them lined out appropriately and fixed, and they will be in your packet on time next time for you to review.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we are, per the city manager, pulling item 10B, 10C, and 10D. Sorry to the folks in the audience that stayed for this. We'll see you at the next meeting. We are now on item 10E, consider action to approve resolution number R 2018-107 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, approving to extend the term of the current bank depository agreement with First National Bank of Bastrop from November 1st, 2018 until December 31st of 2018, attached as Exhibit A, authorizing the city manager to execute all necessary documents, providing for a repealing clause, and establishing an effective date. Ms. Waldron.
Good evening again. As the staff report states, we are ending the 5th year of our relationship and our contract with First National Bank. This extension will just allow a little more time. We're going to go out for an RFP and for depository services, and we'll have that taken care of before the end of December.
Any questions from Ms. Waldron? Councilmember Ennis?
I'm just interested why we need to do the exam, why we didn't start this last summer.
Yes, I thought I had a reminder in my Outlook. So once I realized that we were that close to the end of the contract, I contacted First National Bank to see if they would be open to doing a short extension, and they were.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember, it's interesting what the state chooses to get particular about and what they don't. And there are some very specific procurement rules that follow bank depository contracts for cities as far as how you post and what you do. And so this will give us a time to follow that process that is, while similar to our normal procurement process, it has some nuances to it. So it will give us time to get it right.
Councilmember Jones? Move to approve. I have a motion to approve from Councilmember Jones.
Second.
I have a second from Councilmember Rogers. Is there any further discussion?
Yes.
Pro Tem Nelson?
I know we're looking for an extension on that. Do we have enough time to advertise the RFP and to select the appropriate depository? I mean, does it follow?
It'll be quick, but I do.
I mean, it looks like it's a very short window of time for us to secure that depository.
I mean, we could extend it to January. I think I can still get it done, but I actually didn't factor in that we weren't having 2 meetings in December, but I think I can still get it in.
Well, is it
Mayor and council, if you'd be willing to extend it to January, that'll keep us from having to come back and have this conversation in December.
Well, isn't part of the problem, how long did you ask First National Bank to extend it?
No, well, this is what we talked about. I don't think they would have a problem with it at all, but.
So they think that we're only doing it through December 31st, but you think they're agreeable to go to the end of January?
I absolutely know they would be.
Okay. So, and then along those lines, I understand that it wasn't a reminder in your Outlook, but you're not the only person in finance. So is there now a master calendar somewhere, or, because this, right? I mean, we knew since 2016 that when this day was coming.
Yes, ma'am,
right?
and operationally, we will fix that.
Okay, I appreciate that because it's putting, it just would help all of us, and I appreciate the city manager taking care of that. Are there any other questions or comments? I have a motion and a second.
Do we need to redo the motion since we changed it to January?
I think if Tracy thinks she can get it done in that time frame, that we should just go with what she's presented.
So Councilmember Jones is saying she wants to stick with the December 31st. Do you want to stick with your second on that? Okay, I have a motion that the resolution be approved as written with an extension through December 31st of 2018. Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Jones?
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers?
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Ms. Waldron. We're now on item 10F, and it's still Ms. Waldron. Consider action to approve the first reading of ordinance number 2018-30 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, amending the budget for the fiscal year 2019 in accordance with existing statutory requirements, appropriating the various amounts herein attached as Exhibit A, repealing all prior ordinances and actions in conflict herewith, providing for an effective date, and move to include on the November 13th, 2018 City Council consent agenda for a second reading.
So I realize we just adopted fiscal 19, but we are going to amend fiscal 19. These carryovers happen every year. There are things that were in the prior year's budget that either just didn't get completed. Almost all of these budget amendments have to do with capital type items, and so, we got to 9:30 and they either didn't receive the services or didn't receive the product, and we need to amend the budget to carry them forward. So just highlighting each fund and what the amendment is for. In planning and zoning, they had $10,000 worth of an upgrade. It was phase 2 of their planning software, so we wanted to carry that forward. The vehicle equipment and replacement fund, this was actually something I caught, which is 5 trucks for water and wastewater. They're contributing 117 from the wastewater fund towards these purchases, and we adopted 117. We really needed to have adopted 125, so this is an $8,000 adjustment, which is available in their fund balance in this fund.
Ms. Waldron? So it's 125 is what we needed, but because I'm not following you.
They're contributing 117 from the water and wastewater fund, and there's 8,000 available in the vehicle equipment and replacement fund to bridge the gap.
So why
We
don't we?
approved 117, it cost 125, we're 8,000 short.
So I still don't
It
understand.
was intended to be funded 8,000 out of the vehicle and replacement fund, and we just didn't. I was transferring 117 from the water and wastewater fund. I needed to have a full 125 budgeted in the vehicle equipment and replacement fund. So this is just correcting that $8,000.
Okay.
In the innovation fund, the vote link system was not complete by the end of the fiscal year, so we are carrying that forward to fiscal 19.
And we anticipate finishing that project by mid-November. We ended up having a number of meetings in August and September that were not originally on the calendar, and because Murphy's Law happens, I told staff to bump that until we had a solid period of time that we could install it, make sure it worked, and get you trained. And so now that your meeting schedule has leveled out, there is a window, and Ann and Jesse are already working on that to make that happen.
And the Water and Wastewater Fund had some GIS equipment purchase in their budget in fiscal 18. It wasn't purchased by the end of the fiscal year. We're carrying that forward so they can get that much needed equipment. Hotel occupancy tax funds, the Opry House has requested their unallocated funds for preservation be carried forward. I included their email request in your packet. So that's another amount. I think it was about $19,000 they were asking to be carried forward.
Ms. Waldron? On your sheet that you gave us, the budget amendments, it has BAIPP under new expenditures. Is that just a
I'd have to look, but probably,
It has
to
the
do with
Opera House, and
House.
it calls the department out as
Oh.
BAIPP.
Yeah, department is
Yeah, it has
BAI.
nothing to do with BAIPP.
I just wanted to make,
Yeah.
wanted to clarify that, because on our records, it shows
Okay,
that.
yes, it's for the Opera House.
What department should it be?
Well, it's not really a department, it's just in the hotel occupancy tax fund. In that case, there wouldn't be a department on there.
Okay.
And the Economic Development Corporation, their bond fund, we're just reappropriating the rest of their Agnes Street improvement project. And that's it.
So, and I'm sorry that Lisa has left. I kind of have some concerns over the Opera House because if I'm understanding it correctly, and there was a lot to read there, we gave them money, they painted the walls, and the walls are still peeling. And they've now hired an engineer that's saying they painted it with the wrong stuff. Is that what, am I the only one who got that?
I think it has more to do, from what I understand and what I've read, and Sarah may be able to fill this in. I thought it had more to do with the mortar or the.
Yeah, it's still something between the outside of the building and the
Yeah.
inside of the building, gaps in the walls.
There's some verbiage, and it doesn't really matter, and I do not want to run the Opera House, but I do want to make sure that that they are holding people accountable and that we are not continuing to fund something that's not being done properly or that has to be redone, because I don't think that's a good use of tax dollar. Even though it's hotel occupancy tax, it's still tax dollars.
Sure. Colin, are you prepared as a board member of the Opera House to address this?
I could just speak from first, slide.
Okay, then come to the mic, please.
I think everything that's been said is right on. I mean, it's all, none of it's known for sure. If it was known for sure, I think the problem would be absolutely fixed. There was a big emphasis when all of the renovation started on the roof and the water that was coming in and disrupting the plaster. It makes sense that, hey, it was coming down from the roof, and so the roof is in tip-top shape now. And then the mortar on the outside was addressed and redone, and then the inside plaster was replastered and then repainted, and then lo and behold, you start to see water creeping in. So definitely a very frustrating thing. 135-year-old building, so there's just so many factors that it could be, and there's been different engineering firms kind of just to come in and take an initial look, and then we've decided to go forward with a more thorough inspection there. But I do think the mortar is kind of the popular consensus at the moment, but none of it's known for a fact.
So it's a process of elimination. You did what you thought would fix it, it didn't, and now you're going to eliminate, hopefully, something else in this one works.
Absolutely, process of elimination. And the roof solved a large amount of the water that was getting into the building. And now it's a much slower creep than it used to be. I mean, you used to be able to hear it coming down during a play, you could hear it. And now it's a slow creep, and so process of elimination.
I was encouraged in the report where it says that they are recommending a meeting with the contract installation and warranty and all of that. And I guess, I think we should be careful, and we are expecting them, you guys, if you're speaking as a board member of the Opera House, to be doing due diligence and making sure that we're not spending good money after bad, is my opinion. Councilmember Jones? I think
Drusilla had her mic on first. Well, I have a question, and maybe my understanding on hot funds, I can only explain a little bit from my past of hot funds with Tracy, is if I didn't use it that year, I couldn't have it. It had to, or you took it back. So I'm not understanding how the hot funds can be extended for the next year. Maybe it's a different pocket than I'm used to dealing with.
It's being brought here. I can't.
But I thought that was a state thing, that if you didn't use it, you had to give it back.
No, and we didn't give them the money. So the way we did the hot funds this past year was they requested it as they needed it, or as they had the invoices and needed to be reimbursed. So we never gave them the money, but it was part of their total awarded money last year. So they were just requesting to have that carried over now that they have this additional information and they know that they're going to have this additional expense. they're just requesting, and all I can do is bring it to you and have you determine whether you want to carry it over.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. It wasn't something we already gave them.
No,
Okay.
it was part of their funding from fiscal.
Well, I have
18.
another question, wasn't on the hot funds. Can I ask it?
Yeah, absolutely.
This, on your vehicle equipment, how does that change the overall budget at the bottom line?
It's just that I only budgeted for 117. I'm going to need to spend 125, so I needed to change the budget.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Ms. Waldron, since we've tonight pulled item 10B, which was going to be funding the Opera House, another way to do this would be to increase that contract amount from 92.5 to
Okay.
whatever and make it clean for the year. Is that
We
correct?
could absolutely do that.
Do you have a preference?
I do have a preference that you wait until there is a contract that authorizes the expenditure of that money to be attached.
So we made them authorize invoices last year, and this year we're giving them everything in 4 quarters without invoices?
We had a contract last year that you approved as well, and then there's the budget piece that funds that contract. So we will be bringing back the contract that specifies how much they get and for what, and then this budget document will allocate the money based on the contract you approve.
Right, so they are two separate
That
pieces.
seems even more confusing because last year's contract, to Councilmember Rogers' point, last year's contract was last fiscal year, and the money that they followed that contract, they have been given, and we're now getting ready to
They haven't
approve a
been
new
given-
contract.
they have
I
not
understand
been-
that, but they
okay.
were given some money.
Yes.
They got more than $0.
Correct.
And they followed the contract that was for last fiscal year. They followed that contract, and when they presented the right information, you gave them money up to, and not all of, they had money left that they haven't turned in information for.
Correct.
But in this fiscal year, we're using 2018-93 when it comes back, when we clean it up for this fiscal year.
So is your suggestion that when we bring the contract back, that we will include a reallocation of the fiscal year 18 money in this contract for rehabilitation, or we call it preservation, I think is what the hot funds extension, is that what I'm following?
Yeah, something like
Okay.
that, because otherwise we're trying to keep track of 2 contracts that are very, very different in
And
this
that's-
fiscal year.
And that's fine, but we would still need this amendment because, yeah.
question.
Yeah.
You still need this?
Yes.
You still need this amendment?
Yes, because.
We have to allocate, okay, we're mixing apples and oranges. She's dealing with a government finance officer association, you know, it's the GASB rules that have to do with how you account for something. So our accounting standards that we get audited for say that when you close out the books and you want to reallocate the money, you have to carry it forward and reallocate the budget. So she's taking care of the GASB issue. The Bastrop Opera House needs us to take care of the hot funds issue that we contractually give them. So we're trying to solve 2 problems tonight for 2 different reasons with 2, and if the contract had gone, it wouldn't be confusing.
Well, and also in our current fiscal 19 budget, we only have so much appropriated for the Opry House. It doesn't include their 19,000 we're asking to carry over, so I still need the budget amendment.
If council's willing to approve
right.
the addition.
That's right.
That's
right.
The policy question for council is, do you want to give Bastrop Opera House money that we said we would give them during 2018, and to Councilmember Rogers' point, that they were unable to complete the project to get everything that we had approved for them in 2018. If we are willing to give them the money, then we get into apples and oranges and how you want to do that. So the first question is, that I think is kind of separate from this whole budget thing, is does council want to give the Opera House, and it's $19,000?
Yeah, I think that's.
So we're giving them in 2019, $19,000 that we said we would give them in 2018 had they had the project completed.
So,
Go ahead,
may I be
Councilmember Jones.
recognized?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so my question is, and those of us who have historic houses, I mean, what happened that the decision was made to use the people that they used who didn't make a good decision about how to repair the building? Or I just want some information about that, and we're giving them money to the point that, I mean, if you pick the cheapest usually the cheapest contract's not the best contract, and do they know what they're doing, and if they fix it, are they going to fix the problem, and just who knows about that? Because that's what's being brought to us, is that this was done inappropriately. So
I think that they have stated that repairs have been made, and yet they're still having some of the same problems, which means they're still troubleshooting. It doesn't mean that what they repaired wasn't correct. They've fixed some things, but they're still.
Mayor and council, I'm going to suggest that you adopt this budget amendment less the allocation to the Opera House. We will bring you a contract next time for the Opera House with a provision to include it or exclude it based on what you hear from Lisa, and we will have her queued up to answer this question, and we will put a separate budget amendment on the agenda should you choose to approve it for the Bastrop Opera House, and you can have a holistic conversation with Lisa when she comes back.
Okay, well, then I move to approve less the Opera House consideration so that we can have that conversation and make a good decision.
I have a motion to approve less the $19,000 for the Bastrop Opera House from Councilmember Jones.
I second that.
I have a second from Councilmember Rogers. Is the motion clear for you, Madam Secretary? And you're,
Yes, ma'am.
okay, and Ms. Waldron, you're okay with that? You understand what we're doing?
I do. I was just wondering if, usually it's approved on the second reading anyway. Can it?
No, ma'am. You will have two amendments, and you can take it when it comes back in November. Thank you.
Okay.
What she said. Okay, is there any further discussion?
Yes, I have a question.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilson?
Or statement or question, take it either way. So can we anticipate, and I'm not sure that you're the one to answer this, but can we anticipate these carryover projects, these allocated, encumbered, appropriated funds are going to be spent according to what has been presented as being completed or updated at some point in time, so that we're not stepping back into the previous year's monies and bringing them forward?
Yes, but we will always have some carryover projects. This is my 6th year here. I mean, things like they will order things and maybe it doesn't come in. We ordered it 4 months ahead of time and it took 6 months and it didn't get here. So there will always be some things that we will have to carry over.
And Mayor Pro Tem, sometimes it's just a bandwidth issue. We, as you well know, I'm not making excuses, just stating fact. If we had been able to get Matt and David on board earlier in the year, that ENCODE training would have been spent. So they were hired at the end of the year, so we're carrying that over. That's something that they will get on just as soon as we get beyond this code. So everything on that list I can attach back to a work plan item, and it was just simply a capacity question. So it will be spent for what it is intended, because we've made commitments to you and the community to use that for those work plan things that we also carried over into fiscal year 2019.
I appreciate that, but I felt the question needed to be asked because we're exercising certain priorities and want to ensure that the priorities of the citizens are met. So thanks. Thanks, City Manager.
Ms. Waldron, do we have receipts for the $19,000? Have they presented us with anything?
They haven't presented us because they haven't done anything. They haven't requested the funds yet. They're just asking us to reappropriate it so that they can get it in 19.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have a motion and I have a second. Any further discussion? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Jones?
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers?
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilson?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, council. It is 9 p.m. We'll be going into executive session to talk about the following 3 items. 11A, City Council shall convene into closed executive session pursuant to Section 551.071 of the Texas Government Code to confer with City Attorney regarding legal advice related to the status of the 1445 interlocal agreement between the City of Bastrop and Bastrop County for the review of subdivision applications in the city's extraterritorial jurisdiction. Item 11B, City Council shall convene into closed executive session pursuant to Section 551.071 of the Texas Government Code to confer with the City Attorney regarding legal advice related to the status of updating the city's regulatory program, including public comment and citizen input into the new subdivision ordinance, pending revisions to zoning and sign codes, and uniformity of the permitting process. Item 11C, City Council shall convene into closed executive session pursuant to Sections 551.071 and 551.074 of the Texas Government Code to confer with the City Attorney regarding legal advice related to certain real property, that being 2.07 acres of the former Linenberger parcel. It is 9:02 and we are in executive session. I have a quorum, we can do it. Move to adjourn. It is 10:29. We are out of executive session. There will be no action taken by council as a result of executive session. We are now on item 13. I have a move to adjourn. A motion to adjourn from Councilmember Jones and a second from Councilmember Peterson. It is 10:29 and we are adjourned.